We often see police officers as symbols of order, of control. But what happens when the protectors themselves encounter situations that defy explanation, that chill them to the bone? What happens when the thin blue line faces the truly terrifying? Tonight, we're not talking about routine patrols or everyday calls. We're delving into the shadows, into the experiences that officers rarely speak of. These are the stories that linger long after the sirens fade, the reports are filed, and the sun comes up. Prepare yourselves. We're about to share some of the truest, scariest, and most undeniably real police horror stories ever recounted. These aren't fictional tales. These are the bone-chilling realities faced by those who swear to protect and serve, when they stumble upon the inexplicable and the terrifying. What you're about to hear are raw, first-hand accounts and deeply unsettling encounters that blur the line between the known and the truly horrifying. Lock your doors, turn down the lights, and brace yourselves. The stories you're about to see are not for the faint of heart. This is true scariest and most real police horror stories. My name is Arthur Miller, badge number 714, currently assigned to the East Precinct. I have served with the City of Dunwich Police Department for 15 years. In that time, I've seen my share of what the city's underbelly has to offer, the desperate, the depraved, and the tragically unfortunate. I've prided myself on a steady hand and a rational mind, attributes that have served me well, I believe, in maintaining a semblance of order in a world that often flirts with chaos. My incident reports are known for their clarity and meticulous detail, a testament to my belief that procedure and factual observation are the bedrock of effective law enforcement. I am, by most accounts, what you call a seasoned officer. Not much ruffles my feathers anymore. Or so I thought, until the night of the Ashworth call. The evening of October 12th began like any other autumn night shift. A biting wind was whipping discarded leaves into miniature cyclones along the gutters, and the air carried the damp, earthy smell of impending rain. The city hummed with its usual nocturnal rhythm, a distant siren, the rumble of a late-night bus, the sporadic bark of a dog. I was partnered with Officer Chen, a younger officer, barely 5 years on the force, still carrying that sheen of eager optimism that tends to get scuffed down by years of accumulated cynicism. We were cruising Sector 3, a mix of dilapidated residential buildings and struggling small businesses, mostly quiet at that hour. The call came in at 2:17 a.m. Dispatch sounded unusually subdued, almost hesitant. Unit 714, proceed to 412, Ashworth Avenue. Welfare check. Caller reported, unusual sounds, then an abrupt silence. Line disconnected. No answer on callback. 10-4, I responded, glancing at Chen. Ashworth Avenue. That's over in the old district, isn't it? Near the abandoned textile mills. Chen nodded, already keying the address into the patrol car's GPS. Yeah, place gives me the creeps. Most of those houses are boarded up. Welfare checks are a dime a dozen, I said, more to reassure myself than him. Probably a faulty phone line or a domestic dispute where someone got cold feet talking to dispatch. But even as I said it, a small, uncharacteristic prickle of unease touched the back of my neck. Unusual sounds was vague, and in my experience, vague often meant trouble. Ashworth Avenue was as grim as Chen had described. Streetlights were sparse, and many were broken, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to conceal more than they revealed. Number 412 was a narrow, two-story Victorian, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin, its porch sagging precariously. Every window was dark. It looked less like a home and more like a forgotten relic, a monument to decay. There were no other cars on the street, no lights on in the neighboring houses, lending the entire block an air of desolate isolation. We parked a little down the street, as per standard procedure, and approached on foot, our flashlights cutting sharp beams through the oppressive darkness. The front yard was overgrown with weeds, their skeletal forms grasping at our boots as we walked. I could hear the crunch of broken glass underfoot, mixed with the wet squelch of decaying leaves. There was a peculiar stillness in the air, the kind that makes the ringing in your own ears seem deafening. The usual city noises felt miles away, muted, as if this particular street existed in its own pocket of silence. "Doesn't look like anyone's home," Chen whispered, his voice tight. "Let's not jump to conclusions," I replied, keeping my tone even, professional. I swept my flashlight beam across the front door. It was a heavy wooden affair, scarred and faded. There was no doorbell, just a tarnished brass knocker shaped like a clenched fist. I rapped it loudly, 3 times. The sound echoed unnaturally, seeming to be swallowed by the house itself rather than projecting outwards. "Police department. Anyone home?" I called out. Silence. Only the rustle of the wind through the skeletal branches of a dead tree in the yard answered. I tried the knocker again, then glanced at Chen. No response. Check the perimeter. Windows, back door. See if anything looks forced or out of place. Chen nodded and moved off towards the side of the house, his flashlight beam bobbing in the darkness. I remained on the porch, my senses on high alert. I focused on the door, then the windows nearest to it. The glass was grimy, making it impossible to see inside, but there were no obvious signs of forced entry. An old, tattered curtain hung limply behind one of them. As I peered closer, I noticed something odd. Scratched into the grime on the window pane, almost invisible until my light hit it at just the right angle, were symbols. They weren't letters, not any I recognized, anyway. They were intricate, spidery little marks, arranged in a complex pattern. They looked ritualistic. A shiver traced its way down my spine, cold and unwelcome. This wasn't the work of your average vandal. This was something else, something that felt deliberate and unsettlingly alien. I took out my service phone and snapped a quick photo, the flash momentarily illuminating the strange glyphs before plunging them back into shadow. Chen returned a few minutes later, shaking his head. "Nothing, Sarge. Back door's locked up tight, windows are all intact. No lights, no sounds. Place feels empty. Maybe the caller was mistaken, wrong address?" Dispatch confirmed the address on the disconnected call, I reminded him, though I wished he were right. "Let's try the door." I reached for the doorknob, a heavy, ornate brass thing, cold to the touch. I braced myself, expecting it to be locked. It turned with a faint, protesting click. The door swung inward silently, not with a creak as you'd expect from such an old house, but with a smooth, almost oily quietness that was far more unnerving. A wave of air washed out from the house, and with it, a smell. It wasn't the usual scent of decay or disuse. It was sweet, cloyingly so, like overripe fruit mixed with something else, something metallic and vaguely coppery. And underneath it all, a faint, almost imperceptible hum, a low-frequency thrum that vibrated through the soles of my boots, felt more in my bones than heard with my ears. Police. I called into the black moth hallway, my voice sounding flat, absorbed by the unnatural stillness within. Is anyone in here? The only answer was the persistent, low hum and that sickly sweet, metallic odor, now stronger, more cloying. Chen had his hand on his sidearm, his eyes wide as he peered past my shoulder into the impenetrable darkness. My own hand was instinctively closer to mine. Standard procedure felt like it was miles away, a comforting manual for a world that no longer applied to whatever lay beyond that threshold. This wasn't just a welfare check anymore. I knew it with a certainty that settled cold and heavy in my gut. Something was profoundly wrong at 412 Ashworth Avenue. The air inside 412 Ashworth Avenue was heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on us. That sickly sweet, coppery odor intensified the moment we crossed the threshold, mingling with the damp, musty smell of old wood and something else, something that reminded me of ozone, like the air after a lightning strike, but without the freshness. It was stale, charged. The low hum was more defined in here, a pervasive thrumming that seemed to emanate from the very walls, the floorboards, even the suffocating darkness that swallowed our flashlight beams beyond a few feet. Clear left, Chen murmured, his voice barely a breath, as he swept his light into what appeared to be a living room, choked with dust-sheeted furniture that looked like pale, lumpy ghosts in the gloom. Clear right, I responded, my own beam cutting into a dining area, a long table draped in a similar shroud, chairs upturned as if in a sudden panic. There were no immediate signs of a struggle, no obvious indications of what might have caused the original caller's alarm, yet every instinct screamed that this place was wrong. We moved slowly, methodically, our training kicking in despite the rising tide of unease. Kitchen clear? I called out after a moment, my voice absorbed by the thick silence. Looks clear, Chen's voice came back, a little distant. Nothing but old appliances. Sarge, this smell, it's stronger back here. I moved towards his voice, my light dancing over peeling floral wallpaper in the hallway. The patterns seemed to writhe in the moving light. I noticed more of those spidery symbols, like the ones on the window, etched faintly into the plaster near the baseboards, almost hidden by grime. They were more numerous here, forming intricate, unsettling chains that seemed to crawl along the walls, leading deeper into the house. It wasn't just vandalism, there was an intentionality to them, a disturbing artistry. The kitchen was at the back of the house. Chen was standing by the sink, his light fixed on the faucet. A dark, viscous liquid, almost black, was dripping from it with a slow, steady rhythm. Plink. 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 It wasn't water. The coppery element of the smell was overpowering here, and my stomach churned. That's not rust, Chen stated, his voice tight. Bag it, I ordered, trying to keep my voice level, though the sight of that slow, black drip sent a fresh wave of cold through me. And don't touch it. Standard procedure felt like a flimsy shield against whatever this was. We were trained for blood, for chemicals, but this felt like something else entirely. The hum seemed to intensify slightly as I spoke, the air growing colder. We continued the search, moving from room to room on the ground floor. Each space was filled with the same dust-covered stillness, the same oppressive atmosphere. In what might have been a study, books lay splayed open on the floor, their pages filled not with text, but with dense, handwritten repetitions of those same alien symbols, scrawled in what looked like the same dark, viscous fluid that dripped in the kitchen. The sheer volume of it was unnerving. It spoke of obsession, of a mind consumed. "What do you make of this, Sarge?" Chen asked, his flashlight beam lingering on a page filled with the meticulously drawn glyphs. "Some kind of cult thing?" "Could be," I said, though the explanation felt too simple, too mundane for the deep sense of wrongness this house exuded. "Or someone seriously disturbed. Keep an eye out. We haven't found the caller, or anyone else for that matter." The silence of the house, apart from that incessant hum and the rhythmic drip from the kitchen, was becoming more and more unnerving. Or was the person who had made that call? What had they seen? What had they heard? The pointless stakes I'd read about in creepypasta theory echoed in my mind. Were we just observers here, walking through the aftermath of something incomprehensible, with no perpetrator to find, no victim to save, just this unsettling wrongness? My training pushed me to find answers, to establish a sequence of events, but the scene offered no easy logic. It was a canvas of silent, irrational dread. We found the stairs leading to the second floor. They were narrow, steep, and cloaked in an even deeper darkness. As I placed my foot on the first step, the wood groaning in protest, the hum changed. It didn't get louder, not exactly. Instead, it shifted in pitch, becoming somehow more resonant, as if it was tuning itself to something. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I saw Chen stumble slightly, his hand going to his temple. "You feel that?" he asked, his voice strained. "Yeah," I admitted, shaking my head to clear it. "Pressure change, maybe? Old house settling." But I didn't believe it. The air itself felt like it was vibrating, pressing in on us. The sweet, metallic smell was fainter here, but the ozone tang was stronger, almost acrid. We ascended cautiously, our flashlights cutting through the oppressive black. The upstairs landing was small, with 3 closed doors leading off it. The first door we tried was locked. The second, a bathroom, was empty, though the mirror above the sink was cracked from top to bottom, the shards reflecting our distorted flashlight beams like a broken spider web. More symbols were etched into the remaining pieces of glass. The third door was slightly ajar. A thin sliver of deeper blackness lay beyond it. As we approached, a new sound reached us, cutting through the persistent hum. It was faint, almost inaudible at first, but undeniably there. A soft, rhythmic scratching, like nails being dragged across wood. It seemed to be coming from within that room. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This had to be connected to the unusual sounds from the initial call. I motioned for Chen to hold, then pushed the door open slowly, my sidearm now drawn and held low, flashlight beam centered on the opening. The room was a bedroom, small and sparsely furnished. A single bed, a rickety nightstand, a bare window looking out onto the dark, skeletal branches of the tree in the yard. And in the far corner, almost hidden in shadow, was a figure. It was hunched over, its back to us, thin and frail looking, draped in what looked like a pale nightgown. The scratching sound was coming from its direction. Its hands, long and pale, were methodically scraping at the wooden floorboards, nails digging into the old timber, creating those spidery glyphs, the same ones we'd seen downstairs, on the window, in the books. One after another, etched into the floor with a horrifying, focused intensity. "Police. Don't move. Show us your hands," I commanded, my voice louder than I intended, sharper. The scratching stopped. The figure froze. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, it began to turn. The hum in the house seemed to spike, vibrating through my teeth, and the sickly sweet smell, which had faded, flooded back with nauseating intensity, thick and cloying, as if the source was right here in this room. Chen let out a choked gasp beside me. I kept my weapon trained, my breath held, as the figure's head continued its impossibly slow rotation towards us. The shadows still clung to its features, but I knew, with a certainty that rooted me to the spot, that what we were about to see was not something procedure had ever prepared us for. The figure completed its turn. The shadows in the room seemed to cling to it, to writhe around its form, but as it faced us, the dim light from our flashlights caught its features, and the breath hitched in my throat. It was, or perhaps had once been, an elderly woman. Her frame was skeletal beneath the thin, pale nightgown, her skin like old parchment stretched tight over bone. But it was her eyes, or rather, the lack of them, that seized my mind with icy tendrils of pure, primal fear. Where her eyes should have been, there were only dark, hollow sockets, yet I felt utterly, terrifyingly seen. Not with physical sight, but with a deeper, more invasive perception that crawled under my skin and into the hidden corners of my mind. Her mouth, a lipless slit in her emaciated face, slowly stretched into a grotesque, soundless grin, revealing rows of surprisingly white, needle-sharp teeth, like those of some deep-sea predator. The hum in the house resonated with that silent grin, becoming a physical pressure against my eardrums, my skull. The air grew colder still, and the cloying, metallic sweetness was so potent I could taste it, thick and vile on my tongue. Chen made a choked, gagging sound beside me, his flashlight beam wavering wildly. "Ma'am? Are you all right?" I forced the words out, the ingrained professionalism a bizarre counterpoint to the terror gripping my chest. My voice sounded distant, foolish, even to my own ears. The figure didn't respond, didn't need to. Its entire being radiated a malevolence so profound, so ancient, it felt like it was pressing the very sanity out of me. The symbol she had been scratching into the floor began to glow faintly, a dim, sickly yellow light pulsing in time with the pervasive hum. There were hundreds of them, covering every inch of the floor around her, a swirling vortex of alien script. The glow spread, the light crawling up the walls, connecting with the glyphs we'd seen downstairs, as if the entire house was a circuit, and she was the switch. "Sarge, what is that?" Chen stammered, taking an involuntary step back. His fear was a palpable wave in the small room. Before I could answer, the figure raised one of its long, pale hands. The fingers, tipped with nails that were unnaturally long and sharp like talons, twitched. The hum intensified to a deafening throb, and the glowing symbols flared brighter. I felt a searing pain shoot through my head, as if needles were being driven into my temples. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, fighting against a wave of nausea and disorientation. When I opened them, Chen was screaming. It wasn't a shout of aggression or a call for backup. It was a raw, animalistic shriek of pure agony. He had dropped his flashlight, and it lay spinning on the floor, its beam creating a chaotic dance of light and shadow. He was clawing at his own eyes, his face contorted in a mask of unimaginable horror. "Chan, what is it? What's wrong?" I yelled, moving towards him, but it was like wading through molasses. The air itself resisted me. The figure hadn't moved, its lipless grin fixed, its empty sockets still locked on me. But I knew, with a sickening certainty, that it was the cause. It hadn't touched him, hadn't uttered a sound, but it was doing something to him. The horror was not just in its appearance, but in its power, its ability to inflict suffering without physical contact. This was beyond anything I'd ever encountered, anything I was trained for. My firearm felt like a useless toy in my hand. What good was a bullet against this? We have to get out of here. I grabbed Chen's arm, trying to pull him back towards the door. He was still screaming, a horrifying, wet sound, and when he thrashed, his hands came away from his face slick with blood. The sight turned my stomach to ice. The cliché I'd read about, bleeding eyes, this was it, but it wasn't a cliché anymore. It was my partner, my friend, mutilating himself in a fit of induced madness. The figure took a slow, gliding step towards us. The cymbals on the floor pulsed with an angry red light. The dropped to a gut-wrenching bass note that shook the very foundations of the house. I knew if we didn't leave now, we wouldn't leave at all. Or worse, we'd become part of whatever nightmare was unfolding in this cursed place. Dragging Chen, who was now moaning, his body racked with tremors, I stumbled back out of the room, into the oppressive darkness of the upstairs landing. The door to the bedroom slammed shut behind us with a concussive force that shook the floorboards, plunging us into near total blackness, save for my own wavering flashlight beam. The red glow from under the door pulsed like a malevolent heartbeat. Getting Chen down the stairs was a nightmare. He was barely conscious, a dead weight, and I was fighting against the lingering disorientation, the crushing pressure in my head. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every creak of the old house sounded like a footstep behind us. The metallic, sweet smell was still everywhere, a suffocating blanket. We burst out of the front door and into the cold night air, gasping like drowning men. The relative normality of the street, even in its dilapidated state, felt like a sanctuary. I practically threw Chen into the passenger seat of the patrol car and fumbled with the radio, my hand shaking so violently I could barely key the mic. Dispatch, this is Unit 714. Officer needs immediate medical assistance. For 12 Ashworth Avenue. Send backup, send an ambulance. Officer down. My voice was ragged, unrecognizable. The drive to the rendezvous point with the ambulance was a blur. Chen was unconscious, his breathing shallow. The official report I filed later was a masterpiece of omission and carefully chosen euphemisms. Encountered an unidentified and hostile individual. Officer Chen sustained injuries during the apprehension attempt. Subject barricaded themselves in the residence. Scene secured pending further investigation. How could I explain what really happened? That we stumbled into a place where the laws of reality had frayed, where ancient symbols pulsed with malevolent light, and where an entity with no eyes could see into your soul and turn your partner into a screaming, bleeding wreck. They would have locked me up. A tactical team went back to 412 Ashworth Avenue hours later. They found the house empty. No figure, no strange smells, no viscous fluid dripping from the taps. The symbols on the walls and floor were gone, as if they had never been. The only evidence anything had occurred was the cracked mirror in the upstairs bathroom and the disturbed dust. Officer Chen survived, but he never returned to duty. He lost his sight permanently, and his mind, well, parts of his mind never came back from that room. He lives in a quiet care facility now, sometimes muttering about the woman with no eyes and the scratching song. As for me, I'm still on the force. I still patrol the East Precinct. But I'm not the same. Every dark window, every silent house, every call to a welfare check now carries a new, chilling resonance. I see those symbols in my nightmares, feel that oppressive hum in the quiet moments. The city of Dunwich has its documented horrors, the ones we file reports on, the ones we can understand, process, and sometimes even prevent. But there's another layer to this city, a deeper, darker stratum where things like what waited at 412 Ashworth Avenue stir. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that it's still out there, waiting, perhaps, for its next curious visitor, its next unwitting sacrifice to the patterns it scratches into the fabric of our world. My report is closed, but the case, for me, will never be. My name is Officer Mark Coulson, badge number 714, City of Northwood Police Department. I've been on the force for 12 years now, seen my fair share of the strange and the unsettling. Most nights, it's the mundane domestics, DUIs, the occasional break-in. You develop a rhythm, a way of seeing the city that's different from anyone else. You see the cracks in the pavement and the shadows in the alleyways not just as parts of the landscape, but as potential. Potential for trouble, potential for sorrow, potential for the kind of human desperation that usually only surfaces after the sun goes down. I'm writing this down, not in an official capacity, not yet anyway, because what I'm about to recount, well, procedure doesn't quite cover it. Let's call this a preliminary personal log, an attempt to set things straight in my own head before the official reports inevitably get sanitized, stripped of the impossibility of it all. My sergeant, old Jim McCafferty, always said, "Coulson, you think too much. Just stick to the facts." And I try, I really do. But some facts defy sticking. Some facts burrow deep and fester. My shift last night, October 27th, started like any other. Autumn was settling in properly. A chill wind was skittering leaves across the asphalt as I pulled into the precinct parking lot. The air smelled of damp earth and distant wood smoke, the kind of smell that usually brings a sense of calm, of seasons turning as they should. Inside, the usual pre-shift bustle. The aroma of burnt coffee, the low murmur of voices, the clatter of keyboards as officers finished up paperwork or checked equipment. I nodded to Anderson at the front desk, grabbed my kit from my locker, and headed to the briefing room. Lieutenant Davies ran through the usual notices, a recent spate of catalytic converter thefts over in the industrial park, a reminder about updating our use of force certifications, and the usual watch-outs for suspicious activity around the old, abandoned Blackwood Creek Asylum on the edge of town, a perennial favorite for Halloween daredevils and urban explorers, despite the high fences and stern warnings. Nothing out of the ordinary. My partner for the night was a younger officer, Maria Sanchez. Good cop. Eager, still got that shine in her eyes, thinks she can change the world one traffic stop at a time. I remember being like that. Sometimes, I miss it. We were assigned Patrol Sector 3, which covers the older residential district, a slice of downtown, and skirts the very edge of the Blackwood Creek area. The first few hours were quiet. A false alarm at a bakery on Elm Street, faulty sensor. A couple of kids trying to buy beer with a laughably bad fake ID at the all-night convenience store. I even had time to swing by Mrs. Henderson's on Oak Street. She's an elderly lady, lives alone, and calls us every other week convinced someone's been in her garden. Usually, it's a raccoon, or just the wind. Last night, I checked her fence line, reassured her, and she gave me a slightly stale oatmeal cookie for my trouble. That's the job, most of the time. Small acts, small reassurances. Keeping the peace, one oatmeal cookie at a time. The city has a different pulse after midnight. The hum of traffic fades, replaced by the whisper of the wind in the power lines, the distant bark of a dog, the occasional shout that could be joy or anger, usually too far away to tell for sure. As an officer, you learn to listen to that pulse, to feel its subtle shifts. You learn the difference between the silence of a sleeping city and the silence that feels expectant. It was around 2:30 hours when the first truly unusual call came through. Dispatch sounded a little hesitant, which is never a good sign. Unit 714, could you do a welfare check at 1313 Willow Lane? We've had an unusual report. Caller stated they heard screaming, but it was non-human, were their exact words. Then the line went dead. 10-4, dispatch, I responded, exchanging a glance with Sanchez. Non-human screaming? Sanchez raised an eyebrow. Animal, maybe? Injured deer, coyote? Could be, I said. The Willow Lane was deep in the residential zone, not exactly coyote territory. But line went dead adds a little spice. Let's check it out. Standard approach. Willow Lane was at the far eastern edge of our sector, bordering a dense patch of undeveloped woodland that eventually, miles out, connected to the state forest. It was a street of older, larger houses, mostly set back from the road with mature trees dotting the lawns. Quiet. Almost too quiet. As we turned onto the street, I noticed most of the houses were dark. Only a few porch lights cast lonely pools of illumination. 1313 was at the very end of the lane, a two-story Victorian that looked like it hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint in a decade. Its windows were dark, like empty eye sockets. We parked a little way down the street, as per procedure, and approached on foot, our flashlights cutting beams through the oppressive darkness. The wind seemed to pick up here, rustling the heavy canopy of the ancient oaks that lined the property. There were no sounds coming from the house. No lights. No sign of forced entry from what we could see from the street. Doesn't look like much, Sanchez whispered, her voice tight. Never does, until it is, I replied, my hand resting on the cold comfort of my sidearm. It wasn't a conscious thought of drawing it, more a habit born of years of walking into the unknown. The training kicks in. Observe. Assess. Control. But there was something about the air around 1313 Willow Lane, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. It wasn't just the darkness or the silence. It was a feeling. A heavy, cloying feeling, like the air itself was old and stale, full of things best left undisturbed. This was more than just another house call. I could feel it, a cold knot tightening in my gut. The kind of feeling that usually means your shift is about to take a very, very long detour from the ordinary. And that, I suppose, is where the facts start to get a little uncooperative. All right, Sanchez, I said, my voice lower than usual, trying to project a calm I wasn't entirely feeling. Let's make our presence known. Standard knock and announce. Watch the windows. We moved up the cracked flagstone path, weeds pushing through the gaps. The porch sagged on one side, groaning softly under my weight as I stepped onto it. The paint on the front door was peeling in long strips, like sunburnt skin. I rapped my knuckles hard against the wood. Northwood Police. We're here for a welfare check. Is anyone home? Silence. Not just the absence of a reply, but a thick, absorbent silence that seemed to swallow the sound of my voice. The wind had died down momentarily, and the world felt like it was holding its breath. I waited a full 30 seconds, then knocked again, louder this time. Police. Open the door. Still nothing. Sanchez had her flashlight beam trained on the front windows, which were coated with so much grime it was impossible to see inside. No movement, Mark. No curtains twitching, nothing. Check the knob, I instructed. She carefully tried it. Locked. Standard. Let's do a perimeter walk. You take the left, I'll take the right. Look for any signs of entry, broken windows, anything out of place. And Sanchez, stay alert. That feeling I mentioned? It's getting stronger. She just nodded, her young face looking a little pale in the intermittent moonlight that broke through the clouds. We split up, flashlight sweeping across the dark and clapboard siding. My side of the house was hemmed in by overgrown rhododendron bushes that scraped against the wood with a dry, scratchy sound. The windows were all intact, though dark and opaque. Around the back, I found a rickety screen door leading to what was probably a kitchen. The screen was torn in several places, but the inner door looked solid and also locked. No obvious signs of forced entry. No broken glass underfoot, no pry marks on the frames. I met Sanchez back at the front. Nothing? I asked. Negative, she confirmed. All secure on my side. Windows are filthy, but intact. Back door is locked up tight. Place looks like it's been empty for years, Mark. Maybe the caller was mistaken? Prank call? Could be, I conceded, though the unease hadn't lessened. The line went dead part still bothered me. But we have a duty to ascertain. If someone called for help, we can't just walk away because the house looks spooky. I shone my light on the front door again. No other option then. We're going to have to make entry. I'll try the lockpick set. If that fails, we'll consider a forced entry, but let's try to be neat first. I wasn't the best with picks, that was more Detective Miller's specialty, but most residential locks weren't overly complicated. I knelt, pulling the small kit from my belt pouch. The metal of the tension wrench felt cold against my fingers. As I inserted the pick, the silence seemed to intensify again, broken only by the tiny, metallic clicks as I felt for the tumblers. It took a couple of minutes, the quiet stretching my nerves taut. Then, a satisfying thunk as the deadbolt slid back. Got it, I said, rising and pushing the door inward slowly. It opened with a prolonged, mournful creak that seemed to echo from deep within the house. The air that wafted out was indescribable. It wasn't just musty, like an old house closed up for a long time. There was an underlying scent, acrid and faintly metallic, almost like burnt ozone, overlaid with something else, something sickly sweet and deeply unpleasant. My nose wrinkled. Sanchez coughed beside me. Smell that? She whispered, her flashlight beam dancing nervously into the Stygian blackness of the hallway beyond. Yeah, I replied grimly. Definitely not potpourri. I drew my service weapon, holding it in a low ready position. Sanchez did the same. All right, fan out. Announce ourselves again. Stick together. We clear room by room. Northwood Police. I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the confines of the house. Is anyone in here? We're conducting a welfare check. Our flashlights cut cones through the oppressive darkness. We were in a wide central hallway. Dust lay thick on everything, like a gray shroud. Cobwebs, thick as cotton candy, festooned the corners and draped from an ancient-looking chandelier that hung precariously from the high ceiling. To our left was a closed door, to our right an archway leading into what looked like a living room. Straight ahead, a grand staircase spiraled upwards into more darkness. Living room first, I decided. We moved cautiously, our boots crunching softly on unseen debris scattered across the wooden floor. The living room was vast, dominated by furniture draped in white sheets, looking like a congregation of mournful ghosts. The air was colder here, noticeably so. My breath plumed faintly in the beam of my flashlight. Clear. Sanchez called softly from the far side of the room. Just dust and old furniture. As she spoke, a sound reached us. Faint, at the very edge of hearing. A soft, rhythmic thump-thump. It seemed to be coming from upstairs. We froze. Did you hear that? I whispered. Sanchez nodded, her eyes wide. Yeah. Upstairs. Sounded like a heartbeat? A heartbeat. But the caller had said non-human screaming. How did that fit? Could be pipes, I offered, though I didn't believe it. The house felt too dead for its utilities to be functional. Let's check that other room off the hallway before we head up. The closed door off the hall led to a dining room, equally dusty and silent, dominated by a long, heavy table. Nothing. As we stepped back into the hall, the thump-thump came again, a little louder this time, more insistent. And then, another sound joined it. A low, guttural click, like oversized insect mandibles, or perhaps bone grating on bone. It was followed by a soft, wet tearing sound. My blood ran cold. Every instinct, every year of training, screamed at me that this was wrong, deeply wrong. Sanchez was pale, her knuckles white where she gripped her weapon. Mark. She began, her voice trembling slightly. I hear it, I cut her off, trying to keep my own voice steady. Stay sharp. This wasn't an animal. Not any animal I knew. The non-human description from dispatch suddenly felt chillingly accurate. The sounds were coming from the top of the stairs, or just beyond. We approached the bottom of the grand staircase, flashlights pointed upwards into the yawning blackness of the second-floor landing. The air grew heavier, the sickeningly sweet smell more pronounced. The thump-thump was clearer now, accompanied by that awful, wet, tearing and clicking. It was rhythmic, almost methodical. Police. I shouted again, my voice cracking despite myself. Identify yourselves. We are armed. The only response was an abrupt cessation of the sounds. The silence that slammed back in was, if possible, even more terrifying. It was charged, pregnant, like the moment before a lightning strike. We stood there, frozen, for what felt like an eternity, straining our ears. Then, from the pitch-black landing above, a single, perfectly round, luminous object appeared. It glowed with a faint, internal, sickly green light. It was about the size of a dinner plate. And it was looking at us. No, not looking. Observing. Before either of us could react, before I could even form a coherent thought beyond the primal urge to flee, the object blinked. Not like an eye, but like a camera shutter, a brief, vertical slit of utter blackness appearing and disappearing in its center. And then, the screaming started. It wasn't a human scream. It was high-pitched, yes, but layered with a guttural, rasping undertone, a sound that vibrated in my teeth and seemed to bypass my ears to claw directly at my sanity. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, mixed with something else, something that sounded horrifyingly like hunger. The beam of my flashlight shook violently in my hand. This was it. This was what the caller had heard. And it was inside the house with us. That scream. God, that scream. It wasn't just sound, it was a physical force, a wave of pure auditory malice that slammed into us, buckled my knees, and sent shards of ice through my veins. Sanchez stumbled back, a choked gasp escaping her, her flashlight clattering to the floor and rolling away, its beam spinning crazily across the dusty floorboards and up the oppressive walls. My own light shook, the beam jittering like a trapped bird against the impossible, glowing thing on the landing above. The glowing disk, that single, malevolent eye, remained fixed. The vertical slit, the blink, happened again, faster this time, and the scream intensified, morphing, taking on new layers of horror, a sound like tearing metal, like breaking glass, like the terrified cries of a dozen different animals being tortured simultaneously. My training, 12 years of it, evaporated. There's no procedure for this. No protocol for facing down something that rips your sanity apart with sound alone. My finger was on the trigger of my Glock, but what was I supposed to shoot? A light? A noise? Sanchez. Get out. I finally managed to yell, my voice a raw tear in my throat. Get out of the house. Now. She didn't need telling twice. Scrambling, almost crawling, she retrieved her flashlight and bolted towards the front door, fumbling with the knob. I started to back away, keeping my weapon trained on the impossible glare from the top of the stairs, my feet tangling in unseen debris. The air was thick, vibrating with that unholy noise, and the sickly sweet, metallic odor was now overpowering, gagging me. Then, the thing moved. It didn't descend the stairs. It flowed. Like liquid light, or a predatory oil slick, the glowing disk seemed to detach from the darkness of the landing and began to ooze downwards, expanding, its edges wavering. The screaming abruptly cut off, replaced by a low, rapid series of those awful clicks, like 1,000 fingernails drumming on a coffin lid, growing louder, closer. I fired. 3 rounds, center mass, or where I imagined center mass to be on a flowing, luminous horror. The bullets punched into the ancient wood of the staircase behind it, splinters flying. The thing didn't react. It didn't flinch. It just kept coming, faster now, its green glow intensifying, casting grotesque, elongated shadows that danced around me like mocking specters. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that bullets wouldn't stop it. This wasn't a creature of flesh and blood. This was something else. Something ancient and utterly alien to any concept of life I understood. Sanchez finally wrenched the door open and was gone, shouting my name from the porch. I turned and ran, not a tactical retreat, but a blind, panicked flight. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The clicking sound was right behind me, skittering, gaining. I could feel a coldness radiating from it, a profound, unnatural chill that had nothing to do with the autumn night. I burst out onto the porch, a sob tearing from my chest, and practically fell down the steps, catching myself on the rickety railing. Sanchez was already halfway to the cruiser, her face a mask of terror in the flashing emergency lights we'd left active. "Drive!" I screamed, scrambling into the passenger seat as she gunned the engine. "Just drive." The tires squealed on the asphalt as she threw the cruiser into gear and stomped on the accelerator. I risked a glance back at 1313 Willow Lane. The house stood dark and silent once more, as if nothing had happened. But in the doorway, for just a fraction of a second before we careened around the corner, I saw it. A faint, greenish luminescence, pulsing gently, like a single, baleful eye watching us depart. We didn't stop until we were back at the precinct. The drive was a blur. Sanchez was hyperventilating, tears streaming down her face. I wasn't much better, trembling uncontrollably, the phantom scream still echoing in my ears. The aftermath was difficult. How do you write a report about a screaming, glowing, oozing thing? How do you explain firing your weapon at something that wasn't there when the backup units finally, cautiously, cleared the house hours later? Because that's what they found. Nothing. The house at 1313 Willow Lane was empty. Old, yes. Decrepit, certainly. But no signs of whatever it was we encountered. No physical evidence. The spent casings from my Glock were there on the hallway floor, of course. The splintered wood on the staircase. But of the entity? Not a trace. The air smelled faintly of dust and decay, the cloying, metallic sweetness gone. The original caller who reported the non-human screaming was never identified. The number was a burner phone, pinged once off a local tower, then went dead, just as dispatch had said. Sanchez and I were put on administrative leave, naturally. Psych evaluations. Debriefings. We told our story, separately. I stuck to what I saw, what I heard, what I experienced, as factually as I could, though my voice shook and the words felt inadequate, insane even as I spoke them. Sanchez corroborated my account, her terror still palpable. They called it shared trauma response, stress-induced hallucination. The official report cited discharging a firearm under duress in an unsecured location, cause of perceived threat undetermined. It's a neat, tidy little summary that explains nothing. It files away the horror, sanitizes it for the record. I know what I saw. I know what Sanchez saw. It wasn't a hallucination. The cold I felt, the oppressive atmosphere, that scream, those were real. That thing in the house was real. I still hear the clicking in my nightmares. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I think I can smell that sickly sweet odor, just for a fleeting moment. I'm back on duty now, on desk assignment pending further review. Sanchez transferred out. Took a job in a different state. I don't blame her. Every time I close my eyes, I see that glowing green eye, that vertical blink. I see it flowing down the stairs. This personal log, this confession, I suppose, is my attempt to hold onto my sanity, to put down the truth as I experienced it before the official narrative completely buries it, or before I start to doubt my own mind any more than I already do. That house on Willow Lane is still there. Still dark. Still silent. They say it's just an abandoned property, a blight on the neighborhood. But I know better. There's a shadow lingering over that place, a darkness that conventional law enforcement, with all its rules and regulations, can't touch, can't even acknowledge. The badge, the gun, the training, they were useless. We were flies caught in a web we didn't even know existed. I don't know what that thing was, or what it wanted. I don't know if it's still confined to that house, or if it can travel. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet, I look out at the darkness between the streetlights, and I wonder what else is out there, hidden behind the mundane facade of the world, waiting. And I wonder if, one day, it will find a reason to scream again. The thought keeps me awake most nights. The thought, and the unshakable feeling that whatever resides at 1313 Willow Lane knows my name. It knows I was there. And it remembers. My name is Miles Corbin, badge number 428 with the Arkansas State Police. For the better part of 2 decades, I've dedicated my life to this service, with the last 10 years primarily assigned to the Search and Rescue Division covering the expansive and often treacherous terrain of the Ozark National Forest. I've rappelled down slick bluffs, navigated whitewater rapids, and tracked individuals through dense, unforgiving wilderness. I've seen the tragic consequences of nature's indifference and human error, the lost, the injured, the deceased. But nothing in my career, no training exercise or field manual, could have prepared me for the events of October 2022, surrounding the disappearance of a hiker named Julian Vance. His ill-fated excursion into a remote sector of the Boston Mountains wasn't just a case of a hiker losing his way, it was an unearthing of something ancient and malevolent, a descent into a horror that logic and procedure couldn't touch. This account, pieced together from official reports, my own fractured recollections, and the persistent chill that has never quite left my bones, is more than just a story, it's a stark warning. The initial call came through on a crisp Tuesday morning. Julian Vance, 28, an avid outdoorsman by all accounts, had failed to return from a solo 3-day hiking trip. His planned route was ambitious, cutting through a rarely frequented area known locally as the Whisperwood Trails, a labyrinthine network of overgrown paths and steep ravines that even seasoned locals tended to avoid. His emergency contact, a concerned sister from out of state, reported him overdue when he missed their scheduled check-in call and subsequently failed to show up for work. Standard procedure kicked in. His vehicle, a dusty Subaru Forester, was located at the designated trailhead, locked and undisturbed. Inside, a detailed map marked his intended loop, along with a half-eaten protein bar and a copy of Thoreau on the passenger seat. Everything appeared normal, almost unnervingly so. We established a command post, a canvas and steel skeleton against the vibrant tapestry of autumn foliage. Teams were assembled, local sheriff's deputies, volunteer SAR units, and my own ASP contingent, including a K9 unit led by a German Shepherd named Rex, whose tracking record was exemplary. The first day of the search yielded nothing but frustration. The trails were faint, often disappearing entirely beneath thick carpets of fallen leaves. The terrain was brutal, sudden drop-offs, hidden caves, and dense thickets of thorny bushes that tore at our gear and flesh. Rex, normally eager and focused, seemed uncharacteristically agitated. He'd pick up a scent, lead us a few hundred yards with his usual enthusiasm, then stop abruptly, whining and circling, his hackles raised at something unseen. His handler, Officer Jenkins, a man who trusted his dog's instincts implicitly, confessed that Rex's behavior was deeply unsettling. "It's like the trail just vanishes, Miles," he'd said, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool air. "Not like it's masked or crossed by another scent. Just gone. As if the man evaporated." By the end of the second day, a palpable sense of unease had begun to permeate the search teams. We found no sign of Vance, no dropped equipment, no makeshift shelter, not even a discarded wrapper. It was contrary to everything we knew about lost hikers. Usually, there's something. A broken branch. A footprint in soft earth. A cry for help heard by another. Here, there was only silence, a profound, watchful quiet that seemed to swallow sound. The dense canopy above us filtered the sunlight into an eerie green twilight, even at midday. That evening, back at the command post, reviewing maps under the harsh glare of portable floodlights, old Sheriff Brody, a man whose knowledge of these woods was legendary, shared a piece of local lore. He spoke in hushed tones about the Whisperwood, tales passed down through generations about people who had walked into those trees and never walked out, attributed by his ancestors to things that resided deep within the oldest parts of the forest, things that didn't take kindly to trespassers. He mentioned old stories, the kind you dismiss as campfire tales, of strange lights seen flickering between the trees on moonless nights, and of hunters who returned shaken, speaking of feeling watched, of a silence that wasn't empty but listening. "Normally, I wouldn't give it no mind, Miles," Brody said, his weathered face grim. "But Vance ain't the first. Just the first in a long while to have folks looking for him this hard with modern gear." He spoke of disappearances that predated formal record keeping, stories that had become local legends, cautionary tales parents told their children. He mentioned livestock, too, found mutilated in ways that defied explanation by natural predators, always on the periphery of the Whisperwood. Unsettling symbols, he said, were sometimes found carved into trees near these sites, though he couldn't describe them clearly, just that they made the hair on your arms stand up. "I'm a man of evidence and procedure. I deal in facts, intangible clues." But the utter lack of any such clues in Vance's case, combined with Rex's inexplicable behavior and the oppressive atmosphere of the woods, began to erode my professional skepticism. The real aspect of the horror, as I would later understand it, wasn't just the unknown fate of Julian Vance, but the dawning realization that the conventional tools of investigation, the very logic we relied upon, were proving utterly insufficient. We were searching for a man in a physical place, but it felt increasingly like he had slipped into a non-physical realm, a place where our maps had no meaning and our compasses spun uselessly. The forest itself felt like a conscious entity, indifferent at best, potentially hostile at worst. The mistake, I began to fear, wasn't just Julian Vance's for venturing into the Whisperwood, it was ours, for following him in. We were hunting for a missing person, but a cold dread was starting to suggest that something else might soon be hunting us. Day 3 dawned with a heavy mist clinging to the trees, muffling sounds and reducing visibility to a frustrating 50 feet. The oppressive silence from the previous days had been replaced by an equally unsettling chorus of indistinct noises, the drip of condensation from leaves sounding like furtive footsteps, the rustle of wind through the canopy like hushed, sibilant whispers. Sleep had been scarce for most of us. The command post, usually a place of organized activity, felt more like a besieged outpost. Sheriff Brody's tales, combined with the absolute void of evidence, had seeded a disquiet that was now blooming into genuine apprehension. Even the most hardened veterans among us were on edge, their jokes fewer, their eyes constantly scanning the dense tree line. We decided to concentrate our efforts on a deep ravine system that Vance's map indicated he planned to explore on his second day. It was a treacherous descent, requiring ropes and careful footing. Rex, who had been listless all morning, refused point-blank to enter the narrow trail leading down. He planted his feet, whining pitifully, his gaze fixed on some point deep within the shadowy cleft. Jenkins, after several futile attempts to coax him, finally unclipped his leash. "He ain't going, Miles," Jenkins said, his voice tight. "Never seen him like this. It's like he's staring at death itself." This stark pronouncement from a man so attuned to his canine sent a fresh wave of unease through our small party. Leaving Jenkins and Rex with a couple of deputies to secure the ridge, a team of 4, including myself and Brody, began the descent. The air grew colder, damper, and the silence returned, now amplified by the claustrophobic proximity of the ravine walls. About halfway down, nestled unnaturally against the base of a blackened, ancient oak, we found it, Julian Vance's tent. It wasn't ripped or torn in a way that suggested animal attack. Instead, the fabric was slashed repeatedly, almost frenetically, from the inside. The cuts were clean, precise, as if made with a very sharp blade. His sleeping bag was similarly shredded, its downy contents scattered like a bizarre snowfall across the damp earth. His backpack lay nearby, contents spilled, a water filter, a first aid kit, a few packets of dehydrated food. And his journal. I picked it up with gloved hands. The initial entries were standard fare, observations about the flora, complaints about the steep climbs, enthusiasm for the solitude. But as the days progressed, the tone shifted dramatically. His neat handwriting became erratic, scrawled. "Day 2, noon, feel like I'm being watched. Keep seeing movement out of the corner of my eye. Probably just tired." Later that day, nightfall. "The woods aren't quiet here. It's the whispers. Can't make out words. Just sound. Like wind, but there's no wind. Getting spooked." The final entry, dated the night he disappeared, was barely legible. "They know I'm here. Tall. So tall. Shadows between the trees. Not deer. Oh God, not deer. It's in the dark with me. It's..." The sentence ended in a jagged scrawl that trailed off the page. Tucked into the back cover, on a fresh page, was a single, chilling drawing, a crude, spidery symbol, like a distorted asterisk with too many limbs, almost identical to the vague descriptions Brody had given of symbols found near mutilated livestock years ago. A cold dread, far deeper than any I'd experienced, settled in my gut. This wasn't a man lost to the elements. This was a man consumed by terror, a terror that had apparently manifested within the confines of his own tent. While Deputy Calloway, a younger officer, radioed in the find, his voice trembling slightly, Brody and I examined the immediate vicinity. There were no footprints other than what could have been Vance's own around the tent, and those were days old. No signs of a struggle outside. It was as if the threat had materialized from the air itself, or worse, from within Vance's own mind, driving him to such a destructive frenzy before he vanished. As Calloway finished his call, a sound echoed from further down the ravine, a single, sharp crack, like a heavy branch snapping, followed by a cascade of falling pebbles. We froze. Wildlife? Calloway whispered, his eyes wide. Brody shook his head slowly, his gaze fixed on the gloomy depths below. No. That was too deliberate. We advanced cautiously, weapons drawn, the oppressive silence now charged with a palpable tension. The ravine narrowed further, the walls slick with moss and dripping water. Then we saw it, a fresher version of the same spidery symbol Vance had drawn, crudely carved into the soft bark of a sycamore tree. It was at least 7 feet off the ground. As we stared at it, another sound drifted up from around a bend just ahead, a low, guttural chattering, almost insectal, yet with a horrifying undercurrent of something that felt chillingly intelligent. It wasn't an animal sound any of us recognized. It was rhythmic, almost conversational, and it sent shivers down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Suddenly, from the ridge above, Jenkins' panicked voice crackled over the radio. "Miles! Get out of there! Get your team out of there now! There's something big moving through the trees up here, circling us. Rex is going insane. It's not natural, Miles." His transmission cut off into a burst of static, followed by a sound that could have been a human scream, abruptly silenced. The chattering from down the ravine stopped. A new silence descended, heavier and more menacing than before. We were deep in a hole, cut off, with an unknown threat below and our back up on the ridge potentially compromised or worse. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. We weren't just investigators at a potential crime scene anymore. We were intruders in a hunting ground. And the hunt was now undeniably on. Julian Vance's deadly mistake was becoming terrifyingly clear, and it was a mistake we had compounded by following his trail into the heart of the Whisperwood's darkness. The silence that followed Jenkins' abruptly severed scream was more terrifying than any sound. It was a vacuum, pregnant with the implication of unspeakable violence. Down in the ravine, the 4 of us, myself, Sheriff Brody, Deputy Calloway, and Deputy Henderson, looked at each other, the same stark terror reflected in our eyes. The chattering ahead had ceased, as if whatever made it was now listening, waiting. Going back up the way we came, towards whatever had attacked Jenkins and Rex, felt like walking into a slaughterhouse. Brody, his face a mask of grim resolve, made the call. We pushed forward, he rasped, his voice low. Through the ravine. Might be another way up further down. Staying here, or going back, that ain't an option. None of us argued. The air itself felt heavy with malice. We moved as quietly as possible, our boots slipping on loose scree, every snap of a twig underfoot sounding like a gunshot in the suffocating silence. The ravine twisted, and with each bend, we expected to confront the source of the chattering, the artist of those disturbing symbols, the architect of Julian Vance's terror. Then, we heard it again. Closer this time. The low, guttural, insectal clicking, accompanied by a soft, rhythmic rustling, like dry leaves skittering across stone, even though the ground here was damp earth and moss. A fetid, musky odor, like damp soil mixed with something acrid and vaguely chemical, drifted towards us. Henderson, the youngest of our group, whimpered softly, his hand shaking as he gripped his service weapon. Around the next bend, the ravine opened slightly into a small, circular clearing, dominated by another massive, gnarled oak, even larger than the one where Vance's tent lay. And carved into its trunk, not once, but repeatedly, as if tattooed onto its ancient skin, was the spidery symbol. They varied in size, some small and precise, others gouged deeply into the bark. It was a gallery of dread. And then we saw it. Or, at least, parts of it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a confluence of shadows. But the shadows detached themselves from the deeper gloom beneath the oak, unfolding with a horrifying fluidity. Vance's journal had said, tall. So tall. He hadn't been exaggerating. It was impossibly elongated, its limbs like drought-stricken branches, moving with a jerky, unnatural grace that defied any creature I knew. Its color was the gray-brown of dead wood in shadow, allowing it to blend seamlessly with the forest. I couldn't discern a face, only a vaguely triangular shape of what I presumed was its head, from which the chattering seemed to emanate, louder now, almost a vibration in the air. It wasn't looking at us, so much as aware of us, its movements conveying a predatory patience. Henderson broke. With a choked sob, he turned and scrambled back the way we came, firing blindly over his shoulder. The creature, the thing, moved with a speed that was sickeningly fast for its size. It didn't run, it flowed, one moment by the tree, the next an elongated shadow intercepting Henderson's path. We heard a single, piercing shriek, cut short with a wet, tearing sound. We didn't see what happened, the bend in the ravine obscured it. But we didn't need to. Move! Brody yelled, shoving Calloway and me forward. There's an old game trail I know, just past this clearing. If we can reach it, we might have a chance to climb out. We ran, adrenaline and terror lending us speed we didn't know we possessed. The chattering was behind us, closer now, punctuated by a new sound, a soft, dragging noise. Calloway stumbled, his ankle twisting beneath him with an audible crack. He cried out, falling heavily. I turned to help him, but Brody was there first, hauling him roughly to his feet. Can't stop, Miles. Keep going. Brody grunted, half carrying, half dragging the now sobbing Calloway. We reached the spot Brody had indicated, a barely perceptible break in the ravine wall, a steep, narrow fissure choked with roots and loose rock. Up! Brody ordered, pushing me towards it. Get him up. As I started to haul Calloway, whose face was white with pain and shock, Brody turned back towards the clearing, his service revolver in hand. The dragging sound was very close. Sheriff. Don't. I shouted. He gave me one last look, his eyes surprisingly calm in his mud-streaked face. Someone's gotta buy you time. Get out of Whisperwood. Tell them what's here. Don't let them forget. Then he stepped back around the bend, out of my sight. I heard him yell, a defiant, desperate sound, followed by the roar of his .357 firing, once, twice, 3 times. Then a sound like a colossal tree splitting, a sickening thud, and then, silence. A silence more absolute and final than any before. I don't remember much of the climb. It was a blur of pain, fear, and the desperate need to get Calloway and myself out. We clawed our way up the fissure, emerging hours later onto a ridge as dusk was settling, miles from where we'd entered. We stumbled through the woods for what felt like an eternity, Calloway leaning heavily on me, until, by some miracle, we hit a logging road. It took another day for a bewildered forestry patrol to find us, dehydrated, hypothermic, and babbling. Calloway's leg was badly broken. I was coherent enough to tell them what happened, or at least try. The official search for Vance, Jenkins, Rex, Henderson, and now Sheriff Brody, was intensified, then scaled back, then eventually classified as ongoing, limited mode. No trace of them was ever found. No bodies, no equipment, nothing. Julian Vance's car remained at the trailhead, a silent monument to his deadly mistake. The official report mentions a possible bear attack, or that the officers became disoriented and succumbed to the elements. My account of the creature, the symbols, the impossible events, was noted with polite skepticism, attributed to trauma and exposure. The chilling silence of an official record that can only state unexplained became the final word on the Whisperwood incident. I was placed on extended leave. I never went back to search and rescue. I couldn't. The woods, once a place of challenge and stark beauty for me, now hold only a primal terror. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind rustles the leaves outside my window, I hear those whispers again, or the faint echo of that insectal chattering. I see shadows move in my peripheral vision, too tall, too thin, to be natural. PTSD, the doctors say. Perhaps. But I know what I saw. I know what Sheriff Brody sacrificed himself for. The Whisperwood trails are still on some maps, but the locals don't go there. They remember the stories, even if they don't speak of them to outsiders. They know the forest keeps its secrets. My hiking trip into Arkansas, or rather, my official duty that took me into those cursed woods, was indeed a deadly mistake, not mine, initially, but one that ensnared us all. And the haunting stories from that place are true. It's just that sometimes, we're not the hunters. We're the prey. And the thing in the Whisperwood? It's still out there, I'm certain. Waiting. My name is David Miller, badge number 714, a patrolman with the Rosedale County Sheriff's Department. I've been on the force for 12 years, long enough to see the initial shine of idealism wear down to a more pragmatic, often weary, understanding of human nature and the shadows it can cast. Most nights are a familiar litany of domestic disputes, DUIs, and the occasional petty theft, the mundane rhythm of a small, relatively quiet county. We're not a big city department. There are no sprawling skyscrapers here, no labyrinthine subway systems where horrors can easily fester unseen. Rosedale is a place of rolling hills, dense forests that press close against the edges of our small towns, and a pace of life that generally ambles rather than sprints. Or so I believed. The shift of Tuesday, October 17th, began like any other autumn evening. A distinct chill was already in the air, a precursor to the bitter cold that would soon grip the county. The fluorescent lights of the precinct hummed their monotonous song, casting a sterile glow over the worn linoleum floors and the equally worn faces of my fellow officers. I'd just finished my mandatory equipment check, service weapon cleaned and oiled, flashlight batteries fresh, radio unit tested and secure. The coffee, as always, was a bitter, lukewarm brew that tasted more of the pot's long service history than of actual coffee beans. It was a ritual, though, a small, familiar comfort before heading out into the unpredictable dark. Sergeant Davies, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the lines of too many long nights and too much bad news, was briefing the night shift. His voice, gravelly from years of shouting over sirens and delivering grim notifications, drone on about recent burglaries in the North End and a reminder to be vigilant for suspicious vehicles near the old lumber mill. Standard fare. I sipped my dreadful coffee, my gaze drifting to the large map of Rosedale County pinned to the wall, a patchwork of roads, forests, and scattered settlements. My assigned patrol zone for the first half of the night was Sector Gamma, which included the sparsely populated western region bordering the Blackwood National Forest. It was an area known more for wildlife sightings and lost hikers than for criminal activity. Miller, Davy's voice cut through my thoughts. You're taking Sector Gamma. Keep an eye on those access roads to Blackwood. We had a report last week from a park ranger about some unusual markings found on trees near the old Henderson Trail. Probably just kids, but check it out if you get a quiet moment. Understood, Sarge, I replied, nodding. Unusual markings. Vague, but not altogether uncommon. Kids, cult wannabes, overzealous hunters, we got all sorts trying to leave their mark in the woods. The first few hours of my patrol were uneventful. The steady thrum of the Crown Victoria's engine, the sweep of headlights cutting through the inky blackness of country roads, the occasional crackle and disembodied voice from the dispatch radio, these were the familiar companions of my nocturnal existence. I drove past darkened farmhouses, their windows like vacant eyes staring out into the night. The wind whispered through the skeletal branches of trees lining the roadside, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. It was the kind of quiet that could be peaceful, or, if your mind was inclined to wander, deeply unsettling. Mine, hardened by years of peering into the darker corners of human experience, usually managed to keep such inclinations at bay. Around 1:30 hours, just as I was contemplating a quick stop for a slightly less offensive cup of coffee at the all-night diner on Highway 12, the radio squawked to life with a different kind of urgency. Unit 714, respond to a possible 10 to 56, unknown disturbance, at 133, Blackwood Creek Road. Repeat, 133, Blackwood Creek Road. Caller reported screaming, then the line went dead. No further contact. 10 to 56, prowler or suspicious person. Screaming. Line dead. My hand instinctively tightened on the steering wheel. Blackwood Creek Road. That was deep into Sector Gamma, almost at the edge of the National Forest. It wasn't a road with many residences, mostly just a dirt track leading to a few old, forgotten cabins and hunting lodges, most of them long since abandoned or used sporadically by their absentee owners. Dispatch, 714, copy. En route to 133, Blackwood Creek Road. ETA approximately 15 minutes. Any further details on the caller or the property? Negative, 714. Call came from a landline registered to a Silas Blackwood. Property records show it as an old homestead, largely dilapidated. No priors at that address for decades. Approach with caution. Silas Blackwood. The name felt archaic, like something pulled from a local history book. I didn't recognize it from any recent calls or reports. The caution from dispatch was standard, but the phrase largely dilapidated coupled with screaming and a dead line painted an unnerving picture. The turnoff for Blackwood Creek Road was easy to miss, a narrow gap in the trees marked only by a rusted, barely legible sign. The patrol car bumped and lurched as the paved road gave way to gravel and then to deeply rutted dirt. The forest pressed in on either side, ancient oaks and pines forming a dense canopy that swallowed the moonlight, making my headlights seem inadequate, like feeble probes into an overwhelming darkness. The air grew colder here, the silence more profound, broken only by the crunch of tires and the occasional snap of a twig under the car's weight. As I drove deeper, a strange sensation began to prickle at the back of my neck. It wasn't outright fear, Not yet, but a distinct unease, a feeling that the ordinary fabric of the night was beginning to fray at the edges. The radio, usually a constant, reassuring presence, emitted a low hiss of static, punctuated by intermittent clicks and pops. I tried to raise dispatch for a status check, but my transmission was met with an unnerving silence, then a burst of garbled noise that sounded vaguely like distorted voices before fading back to static. Signal interference was common in these remote parts of the county, especially with the dense tree cover, but this felt different, more deliberate. I slowed the car, peering through the windshield. My headlights picked out a dilapidated wooden fence, mostly collapsed, and beyond it, a structure that could only be 133 Blackwood Creek Road. The house was a two-story Victorian, or what was left of it. It sagged forlornly, paint peeling like sunburnt skin, several windows dark, gaping holes. A portion of the roof had caved in, and the porch tilted at a precarious angle. It looked less like a home and more like a skeletal remain, a monument to decay. No lights were on. No sounds emanated from it, not even the chirping of crickets that usually filled the night air. The silence here was heavy, suffocating. I parked the car a little way down the track, cutting the engine but leaving the headlights on, their beams bisecting the gloom and illuminating the grim facade of the house. Taking a deep breath, I unclipped my heavy-duty flashlight from my belt. The beam cut a sharp white swathe through the darkness as I stepped out of the vehicle. The metallic click of the car door closing sounded unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood, mold, and something else, something subtly metallic and cloying, like old blood, though I tried to dismiss that thought as my imagination, already primed by the nature of the call. This was it. The start of whatever waited inside the decaying structure. My hand rested on the cold steel of my holstered Glock, a familiar pressure that usually offered a sliver of reassurance. Tonight, it felt insufficient. I announced my presence, my voice unnaturally loud in the deadened air. "Sheriff's Department. Is anyone here? This is Officer Miller." Only the sigh of the wind through the broken panes of glass answered, a mournful, desolate sound. The front porch groaned ominously under my weight as I stepped onto it, each creak and pop of rotting wood amplifying the tension. The front door hung ajar, askew on rusted hinges, a dark mall leading into the house's shadowed interior. I pushed it open further with the barrel of my flashlight, the beam cutting into a dilapidated foyer. Dust lay thick as a shroud over everything, a fallen chandelier, its crystals shattered and grimy, a grand staircase, half of its banister missing, that ascended into even deeper gloom, and wallpaper peeling in long, leper strips, revealing the dark, stained lath beneath. The air inside was even more rank than outside, heavy with the odors of mildew, decay, and that faint, unsettling metallic tang I'd noticed earlier, now stronger, more insistent. "Sheriff's Department." I called out again, my voice echoing unnervingly through the silent, cavernous space. "If anyone is in here, make yourself known." Nothing. Just the oppressive weight of years of neglect and the almost palpable feeling of being watched. Training kicked in. Even in a place like this, a place that screamed of desolation rather than active threat, procedure was a lifeline. I began a methodical sweep of the ground floor, my flashlight beam dancing across crumbling plaster, overturned furniture, and cobwebs thick as funeral veils. Each room was a tableau of decay. The living room, dominated by a massive stone fireplace, its mantelpiece bare save for a thick layer of grime, felt impossibly cold, a damp chill that seemed to emanate from the very walls, seeping into my bones despite my uniform jacket. I noted a series of strange, deep gouges in the wooden floorboards near the hearth, not fresh, but certainly not normal wear and tear. They looked like something heavy had been dragged, or perhaps something with claws. I pushed the thought away. Animals, I told myself. Raccoons, possums, the usual occupants of abandoned structures. The dining room was in even worse shape. The long table was still there, though one end had collapsed, and a single, skeletal chair remained upright, as if waiting for a spectral guest. On the wall, a large, dark stain spread like some grotesque mural, its origins impossible to determine in the dim light, though my mind unhelpfully supplied several gruesome possibilities. It was here that I first saw them clearly, the markings. Scratched into the faded paint of the wall, partially obscured by the stain, was a symbol. It wasn't anything I recognized from any gang insignia or common graffiti. It was complex, a series of intersecting lines and jagged curves, almost like a stylized eye, or perhaps something more primeval, more abstract. It was disturbingly similar to the vague description Sergeant Davies had given about the markings on the trees near the Henderson Trail. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Coincidence? I tried my radio again. Dispatch, Unit 714, at 133 Blackwood Creek. Making entry. Structure appears abandoned, but shows signs of unusual activity. Radio reception is poor. Can you copy? The response was the same maddening burst of static, a quick, unintelligible whisper of sound, and then silence. I was on my own. The kitchen was at the back of the house, a nightmarish landscape of rusted appliances, broken crockery, and cabinets hanging open like screaming mouths. The metallic smell was strongest here, almost overpowering. My flashlight beam fell upon a dark, viscous puddle on the cracked linoleum floor near the back door, which was slightly ajar, leading out into the overgrown backyard. I knelt, careful not to touch it, and shone the light directly on it. It was dark, almost black in the beam, but with a faint reddish tinge at the edges where it was thinner. My heart rate quickened. Blood. And it looked relatively fresh. Not hours old, maybe, but certainly not decades. This changed things. This wasn't just an abandoned house anymore. The screaming, the dead line, the fresh blood, this was an active scene. Silas Blackwood? I called out, my voice now edged with a sharper urgency. If you're injured, make a sound. I'm here to help. A floorboard creaked upstairs. My head snapped up, flashlight beam sweeping towards the ceiling. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. Someone, or something, was up there. Adrenaline surged through me, hot and sharp. I drew my weapon, the click of the safety disengaging echoing the earlier sound of my car door. Sheriff's Department. I know you're up there. Come down slowly with your hands visible. Silence. Then, another creak, softer this time, followed by a faint, dragging sound, like something being pulled across rough wood. It wasn't the sound of footsteps. It was heavier, more laborious. My training dictated I should wait for backup, especially with compromised comms. But the thought of someone injured, potentially bleeding out, while I waited outside was untenable. The screaming reported by the caller. The blood in the kitchen. I had to ascertain the situation. I moved back to the foyer, my weapon held in a low-ready position, flashlight being fixed on the top of the shadowy staircase. "I'm coming up," I announced, hoping to elicit some response, any response. Only the dragging sound answered, seeming to move further away from the stairs, towards the rear of the upper floor. The stairs were treacherous, many of the steps rotten and groaning under my boots. I tested each one before committing my full weight, my senses on high alert. The air grew colder as I ascended, the silence more profound, broken only by my own breathing and the thumping of my heart. The metallic scent was still present, but fainter now, mixed with an odor I couldn't quite place, something musky and acrid, like a wet animal, but wrong, somehow. Reaching the upper landing, I found a long, dark hallway stretching before me, doors leading off to unseen rooms on either side. Most were closed. The dragging sound had stopped. My flashlight beam probed the oppressive darkness. Dust motes danced in the white light like tiny, restless spirits. More of those strange symbols were etched into the grimy walls here, larger, more defined, almost seeming to pulse faintly in the periphery of my vision. I blinked, shaking my head, attributing it to trick of the light, the stress. I began clearing the rooms one by one. Bedroom, bathroom, another bedroom, all empty, all bearing the same hallmarks of decay and neglect. Each open door revealed only more darkness, more dust, more of that pervasive, unsettling atmosphere. The silence pressed in, and the feeling of being watched intensified with every step I took deeper into the house's decaying heart. The initial sense of unease had now fully blossomed into a cold, prickling dread. This house didn't just feel abandoned, it felt actively malevolent, as if the structure itself was aware of my presence and resented it. And then, from the last room at the end of the hall, the one directly above the kitchen, I heard it. Not a creak, not a dragging sound, but a whisper. Faint, dry, like leaves skittering across pavement. Too faint to make out words, but undeniably there. Someone was in that room. My weapon was slick in my sweat-dampened grip as I approached the final door at the end of the oppressive hallway. The whispering had stopped, replaced by an expectant silence that felt heavier than any sound. The musky, acrid odor was stronger here, almost gag-inducing, and the cold was intense, a palpable presence that seemed to radiate from behind the closed door. More of those disturbing, eye-like symbols were carved into the wood of the door itself, deeper and more elaborate than the ones in the hallway, almost as if they were meant to be a ward, or perhaps an invitation. "This is Officer Miller, Rosedale County Sheriff's Department," I shouted, my voice cracking slightly despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "Open the door and show yourself. I am armed." No response. The silence stretched, taut and brittle. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic but resonated deep in my gut, that whatever was in that room was not simply an injured person waiting for rescue. The escalating dread, the unnatural atmosphere of the house, the unsettling symbols, they all pointed to something far outside the realm of my training and experience. Taking a deep breath, I reached out and turned the cold, ornate doorknob. It rotated with surprising ease. I pushed the door inward. The room beyond was plunged into near total darkness, the single grimy window boarded up from the inside. My flashlight beam sliced through the black, illuminating a scene that will forever be seared into my memory. The room was small, perhaps a child's bedroom once, though any semblance of its original purpose was long gone. The source of the metallic smell and the musky odor was immediately apparent. In the center of the room, sprawled on the floor, was a shape. At first, in the wavering beam of my light, I couldn't process what I was seeing. It was vaguely humanoid, but grotesquely elongated, its limbs twisted at unnatural angles. Dark, damp patches stained the floorboards around and beneath it. And then it moved. A low groan, a sound like air escaping punctured bellows, emanated from the shape. It wasn't a human sound. My flashlight beam jerked upwards, towards what I assumed was the head. 2 points of faint, reflected light gleamed back at me from the shadows, eyes. But they were too large, too widely spaced, and they glowed with a faint, internal luminescence, like dying embers. Silas Blackwood? I managed, my voice a strangled whisper. The name felt absurd, a flimsy label for the horror unfolding before me. The thing on the floor shifted again, a slow, agonizing contortion. A limb, impossibly thin and jointed in too many places, unfurled towards me. It ended not in a hand, but in something more akin to a cluster of sharpened bones or talons. The whispering started again, louder this time, seeming to come from all around me, yet also from the creature itself, a sibilant chorus of overlapping voices, speaking in a language I didn't recognize but which scraped at my sanity like claws on slate. I should have fired. I should have retreated. But I was frozen, a primal fear overriding every trained instinct. My mind struggled to reconcile what my eyes were seeing with the reality I had known for my entire life. This wasn't a prowler. This wasn't a victim of some mundane assault. This was something else. Something ancient and wrong. The symbols. The ones on the walls, on the door, the ones the park ranger had reported. They weren't graffiti. They were part of this. The creature, for I could no longer think of it as human, began to drag itself across the floor towards me. The dragging sound I'd heard earlier. It was slow, but relentless. The glowing eyes never left mine. The whispering intensified, pressing in on me, filling my head with discordant, terrifying images, vast, empty spaces, alien geometries, and an overwhelming sense of cosmic dread. That's when my radio chose to crackle to life, not with static this time, but with Sergeant Davies' voice, clear as a bell, startlingly loud in the charged atmosphere of that room. Miller? David, can you read me? We've got another call, a bad one, sounds like your location. What's your status? Over. The sound of his voice, a tether to the normal world, snapped me out of my paralysis. I stumbled backwards, nearly falling, my eyes still fixed on the advancing horror. The creature paused, its head tilting at an unnatural angle, as if puzzled by the intrusion. Sarge. Get back up. Now. Code 3. There's something in here. It's not human. I yelled into my shoulder mic, my voice hoarse with terror. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and fled. I scrambled down the hallway, a cold, unreasoning panic clawing at my throat. The whispering followed me, seeming to echo from the very walls of the house, growing in volume, laced with a palpable malice. I didn't dare look back. The stairs were a blur. I practically threw myself down them, heedless of the rotten steps, expecting at any moment to feel those bony talons close around my ankle. I burst out of the front door and onto the dilapidated porch, gasping for air that still felt tainted by the house's foul miasma. The beams of my patrol car seemed like a beacon of sanity in the oppressive darkness of Blackwood Creek. I didn't stop running until I reached the car, fumbling with the door handle, my hand shaking so violently I could barely operate it. As I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door, my gaze was drawn back to the house. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw a figure standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the deeper darkness within, tall, impossibly thin, with those faintly glowing eyes. Then it was gone. I jammed the key into the ignition, the engine roaring to life with a reassuring growl. I slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning in the dirt, and fishtailed back down the track, away from that accursed place, my eyes constantly darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it pursuing me. Backup arrived 20 minutes later, 2 units, lights blazing. I was parked at the entrance to Blackwood Creek Road, trying to compose myself, trying to make sense of what I had seen. I gave them my report, my voice still trembling, struggling to find words that could adequately describe the abomination in that house. They listened, their faces a mixture of concern and skepticism. They went in, armed, in force. They found the blood in the kitchen. They found the symbols carved into the walls. They found the room at the end of the hall, the boarded-up window, the lingering, foul odor. But they found nothing else. No creature. No Silas Blackwood, living or dead. Just an empty, decaying house, heavy with an atmosphere they all admitted was deeply unsettling. The dragging marks were there. The stain on the floor. But the source of the horror had vanished as if it had never been. The official report listed the call as unfounded, possible animal activity or trespassers, property secured. My frantic radio transmission was attributed to stress and poor signal. The screaming on the initial call was never explained. The Blackwood homestead remains abandoned, a dark stain on the county map. I still work the night shift. I still drive the lonely roads of Rosedale County. But something changed in me that night. The world feels thinner now, the shadows deeper. Sometimes, when the radio crackles with static, I hear those whispers, just for a second. And I never, ever, take a call out to Blackwood Creek Road. Some doors are best left unopened. Some horrors are best left undisturbed in the darkness, lest they realize you know they're there. The true terror isn't always in what you find, but in what finds you, and in the chilling realization that the mundane reality you cling to is far more fragile than you ever dared to believe. And sometimes, like the indelible stains in that old house, the horror lingers, a silent testament to the things that lurk just beyond the reach of our understanding. I am Kalen Riley, badge number 724, a 12-year veteran of the Oak Haven Police Department. In my time, I've walked countless beats, processed more unsavory characters than I care to remember, and borne witness to the myriad tragedies and absurdities that the underbelly of a city coughs up when the decent folk are asleep. The graveyard shift at the old downtown precinct, a sprawling Gothic relic of a building, had become my familiar haunt over the last half-decade. I prided myself on my stoicism, my ability to remain unflustered in the face of the unpredictable. I believed, with a certainty only experience can forge, that I had seen the gamut of human strangeness. But the events that began on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday morning, deep in the echoing silence of that ancient station, would irrevocably shatter that conviction. Nothing in my training, nothing in those 12 years of service, could have prepared me for the insidious dread that awaited in the cold, sterile confines of Cell Block A, specifically in Cell 4. The old downtown precinct was a testament to a bygone era, its stone facade darkened by a century of city crime, its high, arched windows like vacant eyes staring out onto the deserted streets. Inside, it was a labyrinth of dim corridors, worn linoleum floors that still bore the scuffs and stains of generations of officers and criminals, and the ever-present scent of stale coffee, antiseptic, and something else, something indefinably old and unsettling, like the building itself was slowly decaying from within. The fluorescent lights that lined the ceilings of most hallways hummed with a persistent, grating buzz, casting a sickly yellow-green pallor on everything. They were prone to flickering, sometimes plunging sections of a corridor into momentary, heart-stopping darkness. Most of us who worked the late hours had learned to navigate by muscle memory as much as by sight. That particular Tuesday, or rather Wednesday morning, as it was nearing 3 a.m., was no different from countless others. The city outside was a slumbering beast, its usual cacophony muted to a distant, almost imperceptible thrum. Inside, the precinct was quieter still. Most of the day shift officers were long gone, and the skeleton crew manning the graveyard watch were either engrossed in paperwork, catching a brief respite in the break room, or, like me, engaged in the monotonous but necessary task of routine patrols. The air was heavy, stagnant, and chilled by an overzealous, ancient air conditioning unit that clattered and wheezed like an iron lung on its last legs. It was a slow night, almost painfully so. The kind of night where the silence stretches taut, and every tick of the grand, antique clock in the main lobby seems to echo with exaggerated importance. I was conducting my rounds through cell block A, a section of the precinct that housed our temporary holding cells. These were mostly used for overnight drunks, petty thieves awaiting morning arraignment, or individuals cooling off after domestic disputes. The block was laid out in a long, narrow corridor, cells lining either side. The silence here was different, thicker, imbued with the faint, lingering specters of desperation, anger, and fear. My footsteps, the rhythmic tap of my regulation boots on the polished concrete, were the only sound that truly belonged, a stark counterpoint to the oppressive quiet. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder here, more insistent, as if trying to beat back the encroaching shadows. I passed by cell 1, empty. Cell 2, also empty. Cell 3, the same. I glanced into cell 4, a small, featureless room, approximately 6 by 8 feet, containing only a concrete slab for a bed and a stainless steel toilet and sink combination. It was empty, just as it should be. Just as it had been for the past several days, according to the duty roster. A small, almost imperceptible sigh of relief escaped me. An empty cell block meant less paperwork, fewer potential problems. I continued my walk, my flashlight beam cutting a steady swathe through the gloom, its reflection glinting off the polished bars and the reinforced glass panels of the cell doors. I reached the end of the corridor, made a cursory check of the fire exit, secure, as always, and turned to retrace my steps. It was then that it happened. A flicker. The barest suggestion of movement in my peripheral vision, to my left, back where cell 4 was situated. I've learned to trust those instincts, those subtle nudges from the subconscious that often register dangers or anomalies before the conscious mind fully processes them. I stopped, my head tilting slightly. Had it been one of the lights? A rat, perhaps. The old precinct had its share of unwelcome, scurrying tenants. I dismissed it for a fraction of a second, ready to continue my patrol. But the image, or rather, the impression of the image, snagged at the edge of my awareness. It hadn't felt like a flickering light, nor the scuttling of a rodent. There was a verticality to it, a sense of presence. I turned back, slowly, deliberately, my gaze drawn inexorably towards cell 4. My heart gave a sudden, hard thump against my ribs, a premonitory beat. And there it was. Standing directly in the center of the cell, a cell I had visually confirmed as empty mere seconds before, was a figure. It was tall, unnaturally so, and gaunt to the point of appearing skeletal, though the details were obscured by the poor lighting and the thing's own shadowy aura. Its back was to me, rigid and unmoving. It wasn't one of ours. The clothing, if it could even be called that, was a collection of ragged, dark tatters that seemed to cling to its elongated frame. The material was unlike anything I'd seen, possessing a texture that didn't reflect the meager light from the corridor but rather seemed to absorb it, making the figure appear like a void, a patch of absolute darkness carved into the dim reality of the cell. A cold wave, entirely separate from the chill of the ancient AC, washed over me, prickling the hairs on my arms and the back of my neck. My mind struggled to reconcile what my eyes were seeing. How had someone gotten in there? The cell door was solid steel with a small, reinforced window, and it was controlled electronically from the central guard station. There were no other access points. It was an impossibility. "Hey!" I called out, my voice sharper, louder than I intended, cracking the heavy silence. "How did you get in there? Identify yourself." My hand, moving on instinct honed by years of training, went to my sidearm, unsnapping the holster's retaining strap. The weight of the cold steel was a small, insufficient comfort. No response. Not a twitch. Not a sound. The figure remained perfectly, utterly still, its back a silent, unyielding statement. The silence that followed my challenge was profound, heavier than before, charged with a sudden, palpable tension. I could hear my own pulse drumming in my ears, a frantic rhythm against the stillness of the unknown intruder. Who, or what, was this? A trespasser? A new detainee I hadn't been informed about, somehow spirited into a locked cell without any notification? That was beyond improbable. It was a breach of every protocol. My mind raced through possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. Was it a prank by one of the other officers? Miller, perhaps, or Davis. They were capable of juvenile stunts, but this felt different. This felt wrong. The very air around the cell seemed colder, heavier. I took a hesitant step closer, then another, until I was standing directly before the reinforced glass panel in the cell door. The figure was perhaps 6 feet away from me, separated by the steel and glass. Still, it did not move. The ragged clothes it wore seemed to flutter slightly, though there was no discernible draft in the cell block. It was an illusion, perhaps, caused by the way the shadows clung to it, making its outline waver, almost like heat haze over asphalt. The need for procedure, for backup, finally overrode the bewildered paralysis that had momentarily gripped me. My voice was steady, betraying none of the cold dread coiling in my stomach as I raised my radio. "Dispatch, this is Riley, Unit 724, I said, my eyes never leaving the dark shape in Cell 4. "I have an unauthorized individual, an unknown subject, in Cell Block A, Cell 4. Repeat, unauthorized individual in Cell 4. Need backup to my location, forthwith." The dispatcher's voice, calm and professional, crackled back through my radio almost immediately. 10-4, Unit 724. Backup is en route. Officer Miller is closest, ETA approximately 2 minutes. Advise if the situation changes. 10 to 4, dispatch. Will advise, I responded, my voice a low, tense murmur. 2 minutes. It sounded like an eternity. An eternity to be standing here, separated by mere feet and a pane of reinforced glass from whatever this thing was. My gaze remained locked on the figure. Its stillness was absolute, a perfect, unearthly rigidity that was more unnerving than any overt threat. The tattered, dark material of its clothing still seemed to drink the light, creating an outline that was sharp yet somehow ill-defined, as if the edges of its form were blurring into the surrounding gloom. I found myself holding my breath, listening for any sound from within the cell, a rustle of fabric, a sigh, the scrape of a shoe on concrete. There was nothing. Only the omnipresent hum of the ancient lights above and the frantic, muffled thumping of my own heart. My training kicked in, a fragile bulwark against the rising tide of primal fear. Observe. Assess. Maintain situational awareness. But how do you assess something that defies all logical assessment? How do you maintain awareness of a situation that seems to be ripped from the pages of a nightmare? The air in the corridor grew colder, or perhaps it was just the blood retreating from my extremities, a chilling iciness seeping into my fingers and toes. I could feel the familiar weight of my utility belt, the comforting presence of my sidearm, yet these tools of my trade felt utterly inadequate against an enemy whose nature I couldn't even begin to comprehend. Then, it began to turn. It wasn't a human movement. There was no subtle shift of weight, no preliminary flexing of muscles, no telltale sound of joints or fabric. It was a slow, almost imperceptible rotation, like a heavy statue being turned on some unseen, silent, perfectly oiled mechanism. The motion was so smooth, so utterly devoid of the natural hesitations and adjustments of a living being, that it sent a fresh wave of revulsion and terror through me. My breath hitched in my throat. My hand tightened on the grip of my sidearm, my knuckles white. I wanted to shout, to order it to stop, but my voice was trapped, a strangled knot in my chest. The figure pivoted on its central axis, its gaunt silhouette slowly, agonizingly, beginning to reveal its side profile. The tattered rags that draped its frame seemed to hang strangely, defying gravity in places, as if they were an intrinsic part of its shadowy substance rather than mere coverings. As it continued its unholy pirouette, the anticipation of seeing its face became a suffocating pressure in my mind. What would I see? The vacant stare of a madman? The twisted features of some drug-addled derelict who'd somehow, impossibly, breached our security? Or something else? Something worse? My blood ran colder than the station's ancient, clattering AC unit, which at that moment seemed to be pumping Arctic air directly into cell block A. Each degree of its turn felt like an hour. The light from the corridor fixtures seemed to shy away from it, casting the turning form in ever deeper shadow. I could make out the suggestion of a shoulder, impossibly thin, an arm that hung too long and straight at its side. But the head, as the area where a face should be, began to align with my line of sight, there was nothing to see. No features. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a deepening of the shadow, an intensification of the void, as if I were staring into a miniature black hole, a place where light itself went to die. It was a hollow, a pit of utter blackness nestled where a human countenance should have been. The impression was not of a face hidden in shadow, but of an absence of face, an abyss. The sight, or rather, the lack of it, struck me with a physical force. A gasp tore from my lungs, ragged and loud in the suffocating silence. My stomach churned, and for a horrifying second, I thought I might be sick. This wasn't a person. This couldn't be a person. The very laws of nature seemed to be unraveling before my eyes, in the heart of my own precinct. What in God's name? I whispered, the words barely audible even to myself. The figure was now almost facing me, or rather, the dark cavity where its face should have been was oriented in my direction. I felt a profound, bone-deep chill, an existential dread that went far beyond simple fear. It felt like being seen, not by eyes, but by the darkness itself. Scrutinized by an intelligence that was ancient, alien, and utterly indifferent to my terror. It was at that precise moment, as I stood transfixed by the horror in cell 4, that I heard the squeak of approaching rubber soles on the linoleum just beyond the entrance to cell block A. Footsteps, quick and purposeful. Miller. Talon? What's up? Dispatch sounded a bit frantic. Officer Dave Miller's voice, familiar and blessedly normal, cut through the charged atmosphere. He was younger than me, still carrying a bit of rookie eagerness mixed with a growing cynicism, but generally a good, dependable officer. He appeared at the entrance to the cell block corridor, his flashlight beam dancing ahead of him. Relief, potent and immediate, washed over me, though it was tainted by the lingering horror of what I was witnessing. Miller. In here, cell 4. I called out, my voice strained. I instinctively turned my head towards him, to direct him, to share the burden of this impossible sight. It was a fraction of a second, no more. A glance to acknowledge his arrival. When I turned my eyes back to cell 4, my heart plummeted. It was empty. Completely, utterly, undeniably empty. The featureless concrete slab, the steel toilet, the bare walls, all were exactly as they should be, stark and vacant under the sickly fluorescent glow. The figure, the turning shadow, the faceless horror, it was gone. As if it had never been there at all. As if it had been a hallucination, a figment of an overtired mind. Who are you talking to, Talon? Miller asked, stepping up beside me. He peered into cell 4, his flashlight beam sweeping across its interior, illuminating every corner. It's empty, man. Has been all night according to the logs I just glanced at. I blinked, then blinked again, feeling a wave of dizziness. My mind struggled to reconcile the vivid, terrifying image that had been burned into my retinas just seconds before with the stark emptiness of the cell now before me. No, I stammered, my voice hoarse. No, there was someone right there. A figure. Tall, dark, it was turning. I swear it, Dave, it was right there. I pointed a trembling finger at the center of the cell, where the entity had stood. Miller gave me that look. The one I'd seen countless times, usually directed by seasoned officers at rookies spinning unbelievable yarns, or at civilians in shock. It was a look of polite, professional concern, tinged with a healthy dose of skepticism. "Did your overtired and seeing things look?" "Talon, it's 3 a.m. on a Tuesday," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "We've all been there. Long shift, weird shadows. You probably just spooked yourself." "No, Miller, this wasn't shadows," I insisted, feeling a surge of frustration and a desperate need to be believed. This was real. It was solid. I called dispatch, for God's sake. It was in there, and then it just vanished when I looked away for a second. He sighed, a long-suffering sound. All right, all right. Let's check it out properly. Humor me. Together, we approached the cell door. Miller ran his flashlight over the heavy steel, the locks, the reinforced window. Everything was secure. There were no signs of tampering, no way anyone could have entered or exited without it being a major, noisy operation, and certainly not silently and instantaneously. He then went to the wall-mounted control panel nearby, the one that electronically operated the cell doors for the entire block. He tapped a few keys, checking the status. Door to cell 4 is logged as secured at 1800 hours yesterday when evening shift cleared it after the last occupant was transferred. No access logged since. It's physically locked, Kalen. Mag locks are green across the board. He looked at me again, his expression now more one of concern than skepticism. You feeling okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have, I muttered, the words escaping before I could stop them. The cold dread hadn't entirely dissipated. Instead, it was now mingling with a new, unsettling feeling of self-doubt and a creeping fear that maybe, just maybe, I was losing my grip on reality. But the image of that turning figure, that shadowed void where a face should be, was too vivid, too viscerally terrifying to be dismissed as a mere trick of the light or a product of fatigue. I knew what I had seen. Or at least, I thought I did. Miller clapped a hand on my shoulder, a gesture meant to be reassuring, but it felt heavy, dismissive. Look, Kalen, seriously, why don't you go grab a coffee? Sit down for a few. I'll finish this round. We've got another 3 hours till dawn, and running on fumes doesn't help anyone. The mind plays tricks in this old mausoleum, you know that. I wanted to argue, to reiterate the impossible clarity of what I'd witnessed, the unnatural turn, the void where its face should have been. But the utter normalcy of the empty cell, the unwavering certainty in Miller's eyes, and the damning silence of the logs had eroded my conviction just enough to sow a poisonous seed of self-doubt. Was he right? Could I have conjured such a vivid, terrifying apparition from sheer exhaustion and the precinct's oppressive atmosphere? The logical part of my brain, the part that had guided me through 12 years on the force, screamed that it was impossible. Yet, the evidence, or lack thereof, was irrefutable. Yeah, maybe you're right, Dave, I conceded, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I felt defeated, foolish even. A coffee sounds good. But as I walked away from cell block A, leaving Miller to complete the patrol, I couldn't shake the icy tendrils of unease that clung to me. The image of the figure, its silent rotation, the terrifying abyss of its non-face, was seared into my memory with an intensity that defied any rational explanation of it being a mere hallucination. Back in the relative brightness of the main office area, the stale coffee did little to calm my frayed nerves or dispel the lingering chill. The encounter, if it had truly happened, felt like a tear in the fabric of reality, a glimpse into something that shouldn't exist. And if it hadn't happened, if it was a product of my own mind, then what did that say about my fitness for duty? The thought was almost as terrifying as the figure itself. I knew I couldn't let it go. I needed something more concrete, something to either confirm my sanity or prove I was losing it. The security cameras. Cell block A was under surveillance, albeit with aging equipment prone to interference. My shift officially ended at 7 a.m., but I found myself lingering, drawn by an obsessive need for answers. Once the day's shift began to trickle in, and the precinct stirred back to a semblance of its daytime bustle, I made my way to the records room, where the CCTV footage was archived. Sergeant Davies, a portly man whose face seemed permanently etched with an expression of weary boredom, grunted a minimal greeting as I requested the tapes from cell block A for the previous night, specifically between 2:30 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. "Bit of excitement, Riley, or just losing something?" he asked, not looking up from his crossword puzzle. "Just double-checking something from my patrol," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. He eventually produced a digital storage device. I took it to a viewing station in a small, cluttered back office, my heart rate picking up again. The interface was clunky, the playback grainy and monochrome. I queued up the footage from the camera angle down the main corridor of cell block I, the one that would have the clearest view of cell 4. I watched myself walk the corridor, the rhythmic tap of my own boots an eerie echo of my memory. I saw myself pause, glance into cell 4. Empty. Exactly as I remembered the first pass. My on-screen self continued to the end of the corridor, turned, and started back. My breath caught in my throat as the critical moment approached. I watched myself stop, turn back towards cell 4. The cell, in the grainy footage, remained stubbornly, unequivocally empty. There was no figure, no shadow, no dark, ragged clothes. Just the bare cell. A wave of disappointment, so profound it felt like grief, washed over me. Miller was right. I was losing it. It had to have been a hallucination. The stress, the hours, the oppressive atmosphere of the old building. Then I saw myself react, my on-screen posture tensing, my hand moving towards my sidearm. I watched myself call out, though the camera had no audio. I saw myself step closer to the cell door, radio in hand. And still, the cell behind me in the footage was empty. My memory of the towering, turning figure was so vivid, so terrifyingly real, yet the camera showed nothing. I fast-forwarded to Miller's arrival. The footage showed him walking into the cell block, me turning to him, then both of us looking into the vacant cell. It was all there, exactly as it had happened, except for the presence of the entity that had been the catalyst for the entire event. It was proof, undeniable proof, that I had imagined it all. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I was about to shut down the playback, to resign myself to the uncomfortable truth of my own fallibility, when something made me pause. My own words from the night before echoed in my mind, for one single, god-awful frame, right when I swore the figure was turning, the camera glitched. I hadn't actually seen a glitch yet. Maybe I had remembered that part wrong too. With painstaking slowness, I began to scrub through the footage frame by frame, focusing on the exact moment I remembered the figure beginning its horrifying rotation, just after I had called dispatch and was waiting, staring into cell 4. Frame after frame showed the empty cell. My on-screen self stood rigid, looking intently at nothing. I was about to give up, convinced my memory was entirely compromised. And then I saw it. For one single, solitary frame. The screen didn't just show the figure. The image itself seemed to convulse, to distort, as if the very act of capturing what was there was too much for the machinery. The cell was not empty in that frame. Instead, bathed in a shower of static and visual noise, was an image that defied coherent description, yet was sickeningly familiar. It was elongated, impossibly stretched, a skeletal silhouette that dwarfed the dimensions of the cell. Its limbs were like spindly branches, its form impossibly gaunt, wrapped in those same light-devouring rags. But the worst part, the detail that made my blood freeze and my stomach clench violently, was the suggestion of a head, tilted at an unnatural angle. And within that shadowy mass, 2 points of luminescence burned with a malevolent intensity, like superheated embers staring directly out of the screen, through the lens, into me. They weren't eyes in any biological sense, but rather pure, piercing points of white-hot light that seemed to radiate an ancient, cold intelligence. The frame flickered past in less than a blink of an eye on normal playback, but frozen there, it was an icon of pure, unadulterated horror. The next frame, and every subsequent frame, showed the cell as empty again. My on-screen self remained, staring at that vacancy, unaware of the single, horrific instant the camera had captured. I recoiled from the screen as if I'd been burned, a strangled cry escaping my lips. It was real. I wasn't insane. That thing, that monstrous, indescribable thing, had been in cell 4. The camera had caught it, if only for a fleeting, corrupted moment. I saved the frame, my hand shaking so badly I could barely operate the mouse. I considered showing Miller, showing Sergeant Davies, anyone. But what would they see? A glitch? A corrupted file? Would they see the same burning eyes, the same elongated horror I did, or would they dismiss it as an artifact of failing equipment? The memory of Miller's pitying look stopped me. This was my burden, my terror. Since that night, things have been off. Subtly at first, then with increasing frequency. The lights in cell block A flicker more erratically than anywhere else in the precinct, sometimes plunging the corridor into near total darkness for unnerving stretches. Officers have reported cold spots, sudden and inexplicable drops in temperature, specifically around cell 4, even when the ancient AC unit is dormant. Whispers, faint and sibilant, are sometimes heard echoing from that end of the block when no one is there. I've heard them myself, indecipherable murmurs that seem to slither just beneath the threshold of normal hearing. And then there's the feeling. Late at night, when I conduct my rounds, when the silence of the old precinct is at its most profound, I feel it. A prickling sensation on my skin, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. It's always strongest when I approach cell 4. I try not to look into its depths for too long, but sometimes my gaze is drawn there, to the empty, sterile space. And in the deepest shadows, in the play of light and dark, I sometimes think I can see a flicker, a deepening of the blackness, the barest suggestion of a tall, gaunt form. I tell myself it's my imagination, fueled by that single, horrifying frame on the security footage and the oppressive weight of memory. But I don't truly believe it. Cell 4 remains empty, officially. But I know better. Something was in there that night. Something unnatural, something ancient. And I fear that a part of it, a sliver of its cold, dark essence, never truly left. It's there, waiting in the empty darkness, watching. And sometimes, late at night, I think it remembers me. My name is Marcus Thorne, and I have served with the Oakhaven County Sheriff's Department for the better part of 12 years. It's a jurisdiction that spans vast tracts of wilderness, ancient forests that whisper secrets to the wind, and remote communities tucked away in valleys where time seems to flow a little slower. Patrolling the backcountry of Oakhaven County is often a solitary endeavor. The roads are long, winding ribbons of asphalt or, more commonly, grated dirt that snaked through miles of uninhabited land. Calls for service frequently lead me to places far removed from the reassuring embrace of civilization, to homesteads and cabins where self-reliance isn't a lifestyle choice but a stark necessity. These isolated assignments, while sometimes mundane, often carry an undercurrent of the unknown, a sense that out here, beyond the reach of readily available assistance, anything can happen. The calls range from the tragically routine, domestic disturbances that simmer and boil over under the pressure of isolation, to the genuinely peculiar encounters that defy easy explanation and linger in the back of your mind long after the paperwork is filed. The call concerning the Miller cabin, situated deep in the wooded hollow up by Whisper Creek, came in just as the sun began its slow descent, painting the western sky in hues of bruised orange and deepening purple. It was logged as a welfare check. According to the dispatcher, neighbors, a term used loosely in these sparsely populated parts, as their closest neighbor was nearly 2 miles down a treacherous logging trail, hadn't seen any sign of the Millers for several days. No smoke from their chimney, no lights in the evening, no sign of their battered pickup truck making its weekly journey into town for supplies. In Oak Haven County, such silences can be ominous. People out here are resilient, accustomed to hardship, but they also look out for one another in their own quiet way. An unannounced absence often signals trouble. The drive to the Miller property was predictably arduous. My patrol vehicle, a sturdy four-wheel drive accustomed to such terrain, bumped and lurched over the rutted track, the dense canopy overhead already beginning to swallow the fading daylight. Whisper Creek, true to its name, murmured softly to my right, its gentle sounds a stark contrast to the growing sense of unease that had begun to settle in my gut. This wasn't an unfamiliar feeling in my line of work, but there was a particular quality to the silence surrounding the Miller place, a stillness that felt less peaceful and more like a held breath. The cabin itself sat low to the ground, constructed from rough-hewn logs darkened by age and weather. It appeared almost hunched, as if recoiling from the encroaching forest. Its windows, small and grimy, stared out like the tired, vacant eyes of someone who had witnessed too much. I parked the cruiser a short distance away, the crunch of gravel under my tires sounding unnaturally loud in the profound quiet. I called out, "Sheriff's Department." "Mr. Miller? Mrs. Miller?" My voice was absorbed by the dense woods, met only by the sigh of the wind through the pines. There was no answer from within the cabin, no flicker of movement behind the dusty panes of glass. I approached the front door, my hand resting instinctively on the grip of my service weapon. The porch boards creaked a mournful protest under my weight. I knocked, the sound echoing flatly. "Oak Haven County Sheriff's Department, is anyone home?" Silence. I tried the doorknob. It turned easily in my hand, the door was unlocked. This wasn't entirely unusual in these remote parts, where a sense of trust, perhaps sometimes misplaced, still lingered. However, given the circumstances of the welfare check, it added another layer to my apprehension. "Mr. Miller? Mrs. Miller?" "I'm coming inside to make sure everything's all right," I announced, pushing the door inward. The air that greeted me from inside the cabin was cold, unnaturally so for a late summer evening in Arkansas. It was a damp, penetrating chill that seemed to cling to my skin and seep into my bones, a stark contrast to the lingering warmth of the day outside. The interior was dim, the failing light struggling to penetrate the small windows. My flashlight beam cut a sharp swathe through the gloom, revealing a scene that was both mundane and deeply unsettling. The main room, a combined living and kitchen area, was tidy. disturbingly tidy. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no indication of violence or chaos. It was the kind of orderliness that speaks of recent, meticulous care, yet it felt sterile, abandoned. A layer of dust, thin but noticeable, coated every surface, suggesting that this meticulous order had been undisturbed for some time. My gaze was drawn to the dining area, a small alcove off the main room. The table, a simple wooden affair, was set for three. 3 plates, 3 sets of cutlery, 3 glasses. And on those plates, food remained. Meals, seemingly interrupted mid-bite, sat untouched. Slices of what looked like meatloaf, a congealed mound of mashed potatoes, green beans still retaining a hint of their color. But over all of it, a thin, glistening layer of what appeared to be frost. Frost inside a cabin on a late summer evening. It made no sense. The chill in the air was pronounced here, almost like stepping into a walk-in freezer. Then I saw it. Sitting directly in the center of the table, equidistant from the 3 place settings, was a doll. It was crudely made, a figure fashioned from bundled twigs, bound together with twine or strips of sinew. Its limbs were stick-thin and haphazardly arranged. But its head was the most disturbing feature. It was adorned, almost crowned, with strands of hair, human-looking hair, dark and matted. The doll sat bolt upright, its featureless head angled directly towards the cabin's main doorway, towards me. Its silent, blank stare was unnerving, a primitive effigy holding court over the frozen, abandoned meal. A low hum began to permeate the air, so subtle at first that I thought it was the ringing in my own ears, a product of the sudden, oppressive silence and the unnatural cold. But it grew, steadily, a resonant thrumming that seemed to vibrate up through the floorboards and emanate from the very walls of the cabin. It wasn't a mechanical sound, not like a generator or a faulty appliance. This was something different, something organic and deeply unsettling. My skin prickled. The feeling of being watched intensified, even though I knew I was ostensibly alone. Instinctively, I reached for my radio, intending to call in my initial findings, to request backup, to voice the growing dread that was coiling in my stomach. "Dispatch, this is Thorne at the Miller cabin," I said, my voice sounding strangely thin in the humming stillness. Static. Nothing but harsh, crackling static answered me. I tried again, switching channels. More static. The radio was dead. Not just a weak signal, but completely inert, as if its electronic lifeblood had been drained away. A fresh wave of unease washed over me. In the backcountry, your radio is your lifeline. To be without it was to be truly isolated. I moved towards one of the grimy windows, hoping to get a better sense of my surroundings, perhaps to see if there was an external reason for the radio failure, and downed antenna, anything logical. Wiping a patch of condensation from the cold glass, condensation on the inside, I peered out into the deepening twilight. What I saw made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Every tree in the immediate vicinity of the cabin, those forming a tight, claustrophobic circle around the small clearing, bore strange markings. Symbols, carved deeply into the bark, were glowing with a faint, sickly luminescence in the fading light. They were intricate, geometric, unlike any Native American markings or common graffiti I'd ever encountered in my years patrolling these woods. They seemed ancient, alien, and imbued with a palpable sense of menace. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This was no ordinary welfare check. This was something else, something deeply wrong. I turned from the window, a sudden, urgent need to escape the cabin clawing at me. I went back to the front door, the one I had entered so easily just minutes before. I grasped the knob and pulled. It wouldn't budge. My breath hitched in my throat. The doorknob, which had turned so freely just moments ago, was now utterly immobile, as if welded shut. I jiggled it, then threw my shoulder against the heavy wooden planks, a surge of adrenaline sharpening my senses. The door didn't rattle. It didn't give so much as a fraction of an inch. It felt as solid and unyielding as the ancient rock formations that dotted the Oakhaven landscape. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my composure. This wasn't right. Doors don't just seal themselves. I spun around, my flashlight beam dancing erratically across the oppressive tidiness of the cabin's interior. The unnatural chill seemed to intensify, clawing at my exposed skin with renewed vigor. The humming, that pervasive, bone-deep thrumming, was definitely louder now, vibrating through the soles of my boots, a silent, unseen pressure building within the confines of the small structure. It was a sound that felt less heard and more felt, a resonance that bypassed the ears and settled directly into the marrow. My gaze darted to the windows, my next logical point of egress. If the door was inexplicably barred, then a window would have to suffice. I'd deal with the broken glass later. Getting out was the only priority forming in my rapidly fraying thoughts. I moved to the nearest window, the one I had just peered through, the one that had revealed the disturbing, glowing symbols etched into the surrounding trees. The condensation I had wiped away had already reformed, obscuring the view with a milky film. I fumbled for the latch, a simple metal clasp common in older cabins. It, too, refused to move. It was rusted, certainly, but it felt fused, as if time and some unseen force had conspired to make it a permanent fixture. I pushed against the window frame itself, hoping the entire structure might be loose, but it was as solidly embedded in the log walls as the door. Frustration and a more potent fear began to bubble up. I wasn't just locked in, I was sealed in. My flashlight beam swept across the other windows, one by one. Each attempt to open them was met with the same unyielding resistance. Latches frozen solid, sashes that wouldn't budge, glass that felt unnaturally thick and resilient when I cautiously pressed against it. The cabin, which had initially seemed merely old and neglected, now felt like a meticulously constructed trap, its unassuming facade belying a sinister purpose. The glowing symbols outside, those alien sigils pulsing faintly in the encroaching darkness, suddenly took on a new, more terrifying significance. Were they wards? Were they part of whatever mechanism held this place, and me, in its grip? The humming grew again, not just in volume but in complexity. It was no longer a simple, monotonous drone. Now, undertones and overtones wove through it, creating a discordant symphony that seemed to pluck at my nerves, making my teeth ache and my vision swim slightly at the periphery. The air grew heavier, pressing in on me, making each breath feel like a conscious effort. I could smell the dust, the decay, the faint, unsettlingly sweet odor emanating from the frosted food on the dining table, and underneath it all, a new scent, something metallic and vaguely ozonic, like the air before a lightning strike. My training kicked in, a desperate attempt to impose order on the rapidly dissolving reality of the situation. Assess. Plan. Act. But how do you plan for the impossible? How do you act against forces that defy all known parameters of law enforcement, of physics, of sanity? My service weapon felt heavy on my hip, a reassuring weight that nonetheless offered little comfort against whatever this was. What good was a firearm against a sealed room and an invisible, pervasive hum? I forced myself to take a slow, deliberate scan of the room again, my light cutting through the oppressive gloom. My gaze inevitably returned to the dining table, to the grotesque tableau of the abandoned meal and its silent, twig-and-hair sentinel. The doll. It sat exactly as it had been, its crude form an obscene focal point in the chilling stillness of the room. I had dismissed it initially as just another piece of backcountry strangeness, the kind of unsettling folk art one sometimes stumbled upon in isolated locales. But now, in the context of the sealed cabin, the dead radio, the glowing symbols, and the unnerving hum, it seemed to pulse with a malevolence all its own. As I stared at it, a new, horrifying dimension was added to my predicament. The doll, its head, the one adorned with that awful, human-looking hair, began to turn. It wasn't a sudden movement. It was slow, deliberate, a creaking, inching rotation that was far more terrifying than any abrupt action could have been. The sound of dry twigs scraping against each other, almost inaudible beneath the dominant hum, reached my ears. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. I was frozen in place, my boots feeling as if they were nailed to the floorboards. I watched, transfixed by a horror that was both primal and profound, as that crudely fashioned head swiveled on its twig neck, turning, until its blank, featureless face was aimed directly at me. There were no eyes to see with, no painted mouth to twist into a snarl, yet the focused intent was unmistakable. It was looking at me. The impersonal dread I'd felt earlier now coalesced into a sharp, personal terror. This thing, this construct of sticks and pilfered hair, was aware of my presence. It was watching me. The implications were staggering, shattering the last vestiges of rational explanation I had clung to. This wasn't just a strange cabin, it was a place where the laws of nature had been suspended, where inanimate objects possessed a horrifying semblance of life. The hum seemed to peak in intensity, resonating within my skull, making my thoughts scatter like frightened birds. The cabin felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in, the oppressive atmosphere thickening to the point of suffocation. I was trapped with the cold, the silence, the impossible meal, and now, the unwavering, sightless gaze of a doll that had no right to move, no right to see. My training, my years of experience, my ingrained sense of order, none of it had prepared me for this. I was Officer Marcus Thorne, a lawman in Oak Haven County, and I was utterly, terrifyingly alone in a place that sanity had clearly abandoned. The sun, I knew, must have set hours ago, plunging the world outside into impenetrable darkness. But in here, the true darkness was just beginning to reveal its depths. And the doll, it kept watching. Hours bled into an indistinguishable eternity, marked only by the relentless, oppressive darkness that had long since claimed the world beyond the cabin's grimy windows. The sun had indeed set, a fact I knew not by sight but by the profound, inky blackness that pressed against the glass, a blackness so complete it seemed to swallow the faint, sickly glow of the symbols I knew were still carved into the trees out there. Inside the Miller cabin, time had become a fluid, meaningless concept. There was only the cold, the deepening, unnatural chill that had now settled into my very core, making my muscles ache and my teeth chatter despite my best efforts to remain still and conserve warmth. My uniform, usually a comfort in its familiarity, felt like a flimsy shield against this pervasive, bone-seeping cold. The humming had not stopped. It was a constant companion to my terror, a soundtrack to my descent into a nightmare from which there was no awakening. It ebbed and flowed like a monstrous tide, sometimes receding to a barely perceptible thrumming that vibrated at the edge of hearing, other times swelling to a deafening crescendo that filled my skull, making coherent thought an almost impossible struggle. During its latter phases, the very air in the cabin seemed to shimmer, and I would catch fleeting, illusory movements in the periphery of my vision, shadows detaching themselves from the corners of the room, only to melt away when I tried to focus on them. Were they tricks of a mind strained to its breaking point, or were there other, unseen occupants in this accursed place? I didn't dare to consider the answer too deeply. And the doll, dear God, the doll. Its head remained turned towards me, a fixed point of malevolent focus in the dim, oppressive space. My flashlight beam, though weakening, remained trained on it, a small circle of light in a vast ocean of dread. I couldn't not look at it, even though every fiber of my being screamed at me to look away, to deny its impossible animation, its silent, judging presence. Several times, I was certain, absolutely certain, that its head had tilted, just a fraction of an inch, as if adjusting its view, or perhaps, in some grotesque parody of curiosity, studying me more intently. There was no sound associated with these minute shifts, just the horrifying visual cue that this thing, this crude effigy, was undeniably, actively aware. My psychological state was deteriorating rapidly. The initial shock and adrenaline-fueled fear had given way to a grinding, soul-crushing despair. I was a law enforcement officer, trained to handle crisis, to maintain control. But this was beyond any training, any conceivable contingency. There were no protocols for dealing with a sentient twig doll or a cabin that held its occupants hostage through supernatural means. My badge, my gun, the authority they represented, were meaningless trinkets in this domain of the inexplicable. I was reduced to a primal state of fear, a trapped animal aware of the hunter's presence but powerless to escape the snare. Thoughts of the Millers circulated endlessly in my tormented mind. What had happened to them? Were they victims of whatever malevolent force now held me captive? Did they, too, sit down to a meal, only to find themselves ensnared? The three-place settings, the untouched, frosted food, it was a chilling testament to an interrupted life, a domestic scene frozen in a moment of impending doom. Had they seen the symbols appear on the trees? Had they heard the hum? Had they watched, in their final, terrifying moments, as a crude doll turned its head to observe their demise? The image of the human-like hair woven into its construction took on an even more sickening dimension. Whose hair was it? One of the Millers? Or victims from even further back, a gruesome collection of trophies? At one point, driven by a desperate surge of defiance, or perhaps just madness, I shouted at the doll. My voice was hoarse, cracking. What do you want? Who are you? What is this place? The only answer was the continued, unwavering hum and the doll's silent, unblinking regard. My words echoed briefly in the frigid air, then were swallowed by the oppressive silence, making me feel foolish and even more helpless. Talking to it yielded nothing, yet the need to do something, to rail against the incomprehensible, was overwhelming. The subtle supernatural occurrences began to multiply, or perhaps my perception of them sharpened as my sanity frayed. The frost on the food at the dining table seemed to thicken, tiny ice crystals glittering in the flashlight beam like malevolent diamonds. Once, I heard a faint scratching sound, seemingly coming from within the walls, like fingernails dragging across old wood. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to send fresh waves of terror through me. Another time, one of the dusty, antique photographs on the mantelpiece, a stern-faced couple from a bygone era, likely ancestors of the Millers, suddenly fell face down, the sound of its impact shockingly loud in the tense silence. There was no breeze, no tremor to cause it. It simply fell. My flashlight was dimming noticeably now, its beam growing weaker, yellower. The thought of being plunged into total darkness with that thing was a fresh horror I couldn't bear to contemplate. I conserved its use as much as possible, switching it on only when the pressing need to confirm the doll's position became unbearable, or when a new, unidentifiable sound pricked the silence. Each time, it was there, watching. Waiting. I am still in here. I don't know how many hours have passed since the light of my flashlight finally surrendered, guttering out and leaving me in a blackness so profound it felt tangible, a suffocating blanket woven from the and the cold. The darkness has not diminished the doll's presence, if anything, it has amplified it. I can't see it, but I feel it. I feel its gaze on me, a cold pressure against my skin, a constant, silent reminder of my captivity. The humming continues its relentless symphony, a lullaby of madness. I don't know what it wants, or what will happen when the sun inevitably rises on the outside world, a world I may never see again. The Miller cabin holds its secrets tightly, and I am now one of them. The humming hasn't stopped. And the doll, it keeps watching. Even in the dark, especially in the dark, it keeps watching.